Dad, you won't be the one walking me down the aisle today. My daughter said it at her own wedding, holding tightly onto her billionaire stepfather's arm as if he were her real family. 10 minutes later, in front of more than 300 guests, she raised a champagne glass and smiled. Some people give you blood, others give you a future. The entire ballroom stood and applauded. Then I stood up and asked one simple question, and both she and her new husband dropped their glasses right there on the stage. I'm sharing a story today that begins with one quiet choice and everything that followed. Before we start, drop a comment for me. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Your perspective might be what someone else needs. Quick note, some details are adjusted for storytelling. What matters most is the lesson this carries. The security guard's hand on my elbow was polite, but unyielding, steering me away from the family section where my daughter stood in her $30,000 gown, pretending I didn't exist. 7 hours earlier, I'd stood at the industrial sink in Beckett's Auto Repair, scrubbing motor oil from under my fingernails, with the kind of determination that comes from knowing it won't work. At 67, with grease still embedded, despite 20 minutes of scrubbing, I pulled on the only suit I owned, a navy blue relic from Eleanor's funeral 4 years ago, and checked the mechanical watch she'd given me on our 20th anniversary. The watch had stopped once before the day she died, and I'd wound it every morning since. 7:45. The wedding started at noon. "Just be there," I said to my reflection in the bathroom mirror, fog still clinging to the edges from my shower. That's all she asked. That's all you have to do. The suit still smelled faintly of the funeral home, that particular combination of lilies and industrial carpet cleaner that funeral directors must buy in bulk. I'd worn it to bury my wife, and now I was wearing it to watch my daughter marry a man whose last name I had to look up on the invitation. Knox Archer. Orthopedic surgeon, 31 years old. Eleanor would have known what to say to make this day feel less like swallowing glass, but Eleanor had been gone since 2019, and I'd been fumbling through fatherhood alone ever since. The drive from Clintonville to Short North took 18 minutes. I knew, because I counted every red light every moment I had left, before I had to walk into the Pinnacle Hall and pretend my chest wasn't hollow. The Pinnacle Hall rose from the Arts District, like a crystal monument to money I'd never understand. Chandeliers the size of compact cars, marble floors so polished I could see my reflection walking toward the entrance, a 67-year-old mechanic in a funeral suit, surrounded by people whose shoes cost more than my monthly mortgage. I pulled at my collar. The November air was cold, but sweat gathered at the small of my back anyway. Sidoni Wainwright, 26 years old and polished to an impossible shine, stood in the marble lobby in a gown that cost more than my garage's annual revenue. Her hand rested on the arm of Kingsley Wainwright, 62, and silver-haired, wearing his wealth like a tailored second skin, the man who'd married Eleanor 2 years after she divorced me, 5 years after I'd worked myself half to death, keeping our family afloat. My daughter's eyes met mine for half a second across that lobby. Then they slid away as if I were a stain on expensive fabric. She leaned toward Kingsley, whispered something. He nodded. Within 10 seconds, the security guard was at my elbow. "Sir, I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about the seating," the guard said. His name tag read Martin, 25 maybe, rehearsed courtesy of someone paid to make problems disappear quietly. "If you'll follow me." "I'm the bride's father," I said. "Of course, sir. Just a small adjustment to accommodate all the guests." When had my daughter learned to look at me the way rich people look at broken machinery, like something to be hauled away before the important guests arrive? Martin guided me through the lobby, past the family section, with its cream-colored cushions and hand-calligraphed place cards, past the friends section, with its champagne glass centerpieces, past the extended family rows, with their silk ribbon decorations. We walked all the way to the back of the hall, where the ceiling lowered and the chandeliers gave way to standard lighting. "We appreciate your understanding," Martin said, and disappeared before I could ask who exactly had misunderstood what. I sat down. The metal chair creaked under my weight. Behind me, someone dropped a stack of dessert plates in the kitchen, and the crash echoed through the wall. In front of me, 300 guests filled rows of cushioned seating, their backs to me, their attention fixed on the flower-draped altar where Knox Archer stood beside Kingsley Wainwright. My daughter's groom and my daughter's stepfather, both of them in custom tuxedos, both of them pretending I was invisible. That's when the first twist of understanding turned in my chest. This wasn't a mistake. Sidoni had done this deliberately. She'd seen me walk in, recognized the funeral suit, and the oil-stained hands I could never quite clean, and made the calculation in real time. She'd orchestrated my exile in front of Columbus's entire elite class, executing my erasure with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning it. The hollow feeling in my chest solidified into something colder, clearer. I pulled Eleanor's watch from my pocket. 11:58, 2 minutes until the ceremony. The second hand ticked forward with mechanical precision, each tiny click, a reminder that time moves, whether you want it to or not. Kingsley Wainwright glanced back at the family section, his expression satisfied. He'd won Eleanor, and now he'd won Sidney. 2 generations of Beckett women, and I was sitting 3 feet from the kitchen door, like forgotten luggage. 3 feet from the kitchen door. That was the distance between me and the industrial dishwasher, where they'd wash the champagne glasses after the toast. That was where my daughter had decided I belonged. The string quartet struck the first notes of the wedding march. 300 guests rose to their feet in a synchronized wave of rustling silk and expensive cologne. The wall of tailored backs blocked my view of everything, except the ceiling and the kitchen door's exit sign, glowing red in the corner of my vision. I heard my daughter's heels on the marble aisle. Click, click, click. The same rhythm as Eleanor's watch. The same inevitability. The applause started when Sidney reached the altar. Thunderous, enthusiastic. The kind of noise that celebrates arrival and belonging, and the joining of 2 people who deserve each other. But sitting alone in that back row in my funeral suit, with Eleanor's watch ticking in my palm, the applause sounded exactly like a coffin lid slamming shut. And I realized I was the only one in this room who understood I was already dead. I didn't leave, though, because I'd finally noticed what Sidney hadn't. What I'd noticed was Simple Knox Archer couldn't meet Kingsley Wainwright's eyes during the vows, and my daughter kept checking her phone between ceremony readings. People who are getting married don't check their phones. People executing plans do. My daughter's voice filled the ballroom through the sound system, clear and bright and utterly remorseless. I want to thank everyone for being here today. Sidney said, her champagne glass catching the spotlight like a weapon made of crystal. Especially the man who taught me that bloodlines don't matter, only vision, only excellence. She turned toward Kingsley, who stood at the head table with the expression of a man who just won a corporate hostile takeover. To Kingsley, Sidney continued, her voice breaking in practiced places. My true father. The applause started before she finished the sentence. 300 guests rising to their feet, champagne glasses lifted, celebrating a lie so polished it reflected the chandelier light. I stayed seated. My funeral suit suddenly felt heavier. Some of you know I didn't have an easy childhood, Sidney said. And the ballroom went quiet in that particular way. Audiences do when they sense a confession coming. I spent too many years trying to repair what was broken instead of building something new, trying to fix toxic patterns that held me back from becoming who I was meant to be. She wasn't looking at me. She didn't have to. Every word landed like a lawyer's closing argument. But Kingsley showed me something revolutionary, she continued. He showed me that we choose our families, we choose our futures, we choose to leave behind the shadows of a difficult past and step into the light of what we can become. More applause, louder this time. Kingsley dabbed at his eyes with a handkerchief that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. That's when the first twist of nausea turned in my stomach. This wasn't just erasure through omission, this was active rewriting. She was standing in front of Columbus's elite and telling them I'd been absent, harmful, toxic, a shadow she'd had to overcome through Kingsley's intervention. I thought about the 17 years I'd worked 60-hour weeks at the garage while Eleanor recovered from surgery. The college tuition I'd paid before, Sidoni switched to Harvard and let Kingsley cover the Ivy League price tag, the birthdays and graduations, and the 1,000 small moments where I'd shown up wearing grease-stained shirts because I'd come straight from work. All of it reduced to toxic patterns, all of it rewritten as shadows. I inherited ambition from my mother, Sidney said, raising her glass higher. And I inherited wisdom from Kingsley, the wisdom to know that some children inherit wealth, but I inherited something better. I inherited the courage to build my own legacy. When had Eleanor, who'd worked at the community legal clinic until cancer made her too weak to stand, become a memorial trust in our daughter's mouth, stripped of her name, reduced to a line item in a philanthropic portfolio. The reception line formed. Guests moved toward the lobby, where tables groaned under the weight of appetizers I couldn't pronounce. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the metal folding chair. The kitchen door swung open behind me, releasing the smell of industrial dishwasher steam and catered salmon. I could leave, should leave, walk out the service exit drive back to Clintonville, pretend this day had never happened. But Eleanor's watch ticked in my pocket steady and insistent, and I thought about the paperwork I'd found last month in the garage's filing cabinet, the trust documents with signatures that looked almost right but weren't quite. The transfer forms dated for November 20th, 2023. The videographer moved through the crowd, his vest reading, Derek Columbus Premiere Events. Young, maybe 28, focused entirely on his lens and not on the substance of what he was recording. He held out a wireless microphone to an elderly woman in pearls. "Any words for the happy couple?" Derek asked. The woman gushed about true love and perfect matches. Derek moved to the next guest. I stepped into the lobby. The marble floor amplified every footstep. Guests milled around high-top tables, their conversations a low roar of congratulations and networking. Derek turned toward me, microphone extended on instinct. "Sir, any message for Sidoni?" I said loud enough that the nearest cluster of guests went quiet. "Before you and Knox leave for your honeymoon, can you clarify for the family the current management status of your late mother's memorial trust? The Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust being transferred at the November 20th Humanitarian Gala, YAMD." The silence spread like spilled wine across white linen. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Knox Archer's face went from wedding champagne pink to hospital corridor gray in under 3 seconds. His champagne glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble with a sound like a gunshot. "Dad," Sidney said, and the word came out sharp as broken crystal. Not father, not even Harlan, just dad spoken like an accusation. She crossed the lobby toward me, her wedding gown trailing behind her like evidence. Up close, I could see the calculation in her eyes, the rapid assessment of damage and strategy. "This isn't the time," she said quietly, her smile fixed for the cameras still recording. "November 20th is 10 days away," I said. "Seems like exactly the time." Kingsley appeared at her elbow, his hand proprietary on her shoulder. "Harlan, let's not make a scene at your daughter's wedding." "I'm not making anything," I said. "I'm asking a question." My daughter turned toward me, and for the first time all day she really looked at me. It wasn't fear in her eyes. It wasn't even anger. It was venom. 10 days. That's how long I had before the gala. 10 days to stop my daughter from stealing $42 million and erasing the last trace of her mother from the earth. 300 witnesses had just watched my daughter erase me from her history. Now, 300 witnesses had just heard me ask the one question she couldn't afford to answer. The 10-day clock to the November 20th gala had started, and from the look in Sidney's eyes, she knew exactly what it meant. I didn't know yet that by midnight I wouldn't have a home to return to. Midnight came and went while I drove circles around Columbus trying to understand what had just happened at the wedding. By dawn, I understood perfectly. The trash bags were heavy-duty contractor black, the kind I used at the garage for oil-soaked rags, and my entire life was packed inside 6 of them, lined up on the curb like body bags waiting for pickup. I pulled my truck to the curb outside the German Village townhouse at 6:15 on Sunday morning. The November cold bit through my shirt. I'd never changed out of the funeral suit, and the streetlights were still on, casting yellow pools across the bags. I could see clothes spilling from a tear in one bag, work boots in another, a framed photograph of Eleanor that used to sit on the mantel now wedged between what looked like my tax records and a box of socket wrenches. A woman stood beside the bags checking her phone. Mid-40s charcoal pantsuit that cost more than my truck leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Victoria Rothman, according to the business card she handed me before I could speak. She had the measured precision of someone paid by the hour to destroy lives politely. "Mr. Beckett," she said. "I'm here representing Sidney Wainwright. She resumed her married name this morning. This is a formal cease and desist and trespass notification." She held out a document, official letterhead, legal language dense as engine sludge. "I helped maintain this house for 9 years. I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I have a right to... The deed has been solely in Ms. Wainwright's name since June 2020. Victoria interrupted, producing a second document from her portfolio. "Your mortgage contributions over that period were documented as voluntary gifts. You have no legal standing, and any attempt to enter this property will result in criminal charges for trespassing and harassment. June 2020, 3.5 years ago, 6 months after Eleanor died, when I'd been so deep in grief I could barely remember to eat, let alone check property records. My daughter had been planning this for 3.5 years. The locks have been changed. Victoria continued checking something on her phone. Ms. Wainwright has also filed for a protection order, citing yesterday's disruption at her wedding and a pattern of controlling behavior. You are not to contact her, her husband, or any member of her immediate family. Any violation will result in arrest. She handed me the trespass warning, turned on her expensive heels, and walked to a black sedan parked 3 houses down. The engine started. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and I stood there in my funeral suit, looking at 6 trash bags containing everything I owned. I stood there holding a bag containing Eleanor's framed photograph and my work boots, and I understood this was how you murdered someone in public without leaving fingerprints. I loaded the bags into my truck bed. It took 4 trips. Nobody came outside to watch, but I saw curtains move in the house across the street, the Hendersons who I'd helped move a piano 3 years ago. The curtain dropped when I looked up. By Monday morning, the articles had appeared. I found the first one on my phone at 7 a.m., sitting in the garage office drinking coffee that tasted like rust. Columbus Business Daily. Local businessman disrupts daughter's wedding guests, report harassment. The article quoted multiple anonymous sources describing a pattern of financial manipulation and emotional abuse spanning decades. One witness claimed I'd shown up uninvited and made threatening statements about family assets. I'd been invited. I had the embossed invitation in my glove box. By noon, 3 more articles had posted. The Columbus Dispatch ran a sympathetic piece about children of toxic parents learning to set boundaries. A legal blog discussed restraining orders and elder abuse. Someone had leaked the protection order filing to a local news station, and their noon broadcast included a segment on family estrangement, featuring a psychologist who'd never met me, explaining my probable narcissistic tendencies. I walked to the hardware store at 2 p.m. because I needed wood screws and because I'd been shopping there for 30 years and I needed something to feel normal. Tommy Briggs had sold me drill bits and sandpaper for 28 years, and now he wouldn't meet my eyes across the counter. "Mr. Beckett," he said quietly, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We don't want any trouble here." "Tommy, I'm buying wood screws." I saw the news. The owner said, "Look, I'm sorry, but you need to leave." I left. On the walk back to the garage, 3 people I'd known for decades crossed the street to avoid me. Mrs. Chen, whose Buick I'd kept running for 15 years, with parts cost only repairs. Marcus Sullivan, who brought me homemade cookies every Christmas. Janet Holloway, who'd cried at Eleanor's funeral and told me I was the finest man she'd ever known. All of them looked at me like I was radioactive. I tried calling people. Eleanor's sister, Lorraine voicemail. My old friend Pete Donovan, who I'd served with in the National Guard voicemail. Jerry Holbrook, whose transmission I'd rebuilt for cost when he couldn't afford the full price voicemail. 12 calls, 12 voicemails. Not one person called me back. One of the articles included quotes from anonymous sources at my garage. Someone described my explosive temper and history of intimidating customers. I recognized the phrasing. It came from a thank you card Jerry Holbrook had sent me 5 years ago, talking about how passionate I was about my work and how I'd fought to find him affordable parts. He'd sold me out for the price of a quote in a newspaper article. Sidoni hadn't just bought lawyers and PR firms. She'd bought or coerced the people I'd helped for decades. She'd turned my community into weapons and aimed them all at my throat. I sat in my truck in the hardware store parking lot at 4 p.m., staring at my phone screen, showing 12 unanswered calls, 12 people who'd decided in under 24 hours that I didn't exist. She'd erased me from her wedding, from my home, and now from my entire community. But she'd made one mistake. She'd left me with nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose remember things they're supposed to forget. The thing I remembered was simple. Eleanor had wound that watch every single morning for 20 years, and she'd made me promise to keep winding it after she was gone. She'd never told me why. Now, sitting in the empty garage at midnight, I understood she'd been waiting for this. Eleanor's watch stopped at exactly 11:47 p.m., and in the silence of the empty garage, I heard it, the tiny mechanical click that meant something inside the casing had finally broken free. I sat at my workbench under the fluorescent lights, the kind of harsh white glow that makes everything look like an autopsy. The watch lay in my palm, suddenly heavy. It had run without interruption since Eleanor died, ticking through every sunrise and sunset, for 4 years and 2 months. I'd wound it this morning, same as always. The mechanism had been flawless, but now it was silent. I pulled out my jeweler's loop and precision screwdrivers, the same tools I used for carburetor work when the screws were too small for regular equipment. The watch casing was Swiss-made, sealed tight, not meant to be opened by amateurs. But I'd rebuilt enough delicate mechanisms in my life to know how to work without forcing anything. The back plate released with the softest whisper of metal on metal. The gear assembly looked perfect. No broken springs, no stripped teeth. But behind the mechanism, in the space between the movement and the outer casing, something gleamed. A tiny brass key no bigger than my thumbnail, taped to the interior with surgical precision. And folded beneath it a piece of paper, so thin it was nearly translucent, covered in Eleanor's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The paper was no larger than a postage stamp, the words compressed into every available millimeter. It's Fifth Third Bank High Street branch. Only if she turns on you completely. Box 847. I knew. I set the note on the workbench. The brass key sat beside it, catching the fluorescent light. And etched into the inner watch casing with jeweler's precision, almost invisible, unless you knew to look, 847291556. Eleanor had died on October 15th, 2019, at 6:22 a.m. The watch had run for exactly 1,519 days, 17 hours and 25 minutes. I didn't sleep. By 6 a.m., I was standing on Lorraine Prescott's doorstep in German Village, 3 blocks from the townhouse where my belongings had been bagged up like medical waste. Lorraine Prescott, 65, and sharp as the day Eleanor introduced us 40 years ago, opened her door in a worn cardigan and reading glasses, her steel gray hair pulled back her eyes. Eleanor's eyes assessing me with the same unflinching clarity her sister had possessed. She stopped the watch, I said, holding up the brass key. Lorraine's expression didn't change, but something in her shoulders relaxed. Come in. I've been paying the storage fees for 4 years, waiting for you to show up. Her kitchen smelled like coffee and old books. She poured 2 cups without asking, set them on a table covered in legal documents, and sat across from me. The Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust, Lorraine said. $42 million, Eleanor's inheritance from our parents' estate and her own investments. She set it up 6 months before she died to fund working-class community programs, trade schools, legal aid clinics, medical assistance, everything she'd spent her life fighting for. And Sidoni mentioned a humanitarian foundation at the wedding, I said. Lorraine's mouth tightened. Your daughter wants to transfer the entire trust into offshore accounts and call it a humanitarian foundation. The November 20th Gola isn't Kingsley's event, it's hers. She's been planning it for 18 months. Kingsley's just the respectable face she's using to legitimize the theft. I set my coffee down. She's 26 years old. How does she even know how to... Your daughter isn't the victim here, Harlan, Lorraine interrupted. She's the architect. Kingsley Wainwright is just the hammer she's using to build her empire. The words landed like a wrench dropped on concrete. The townhouse transfer, the smear campaign, the protection order, that's all Sidoni. She's been studying Eleanor's trust structure since before your wife died. She knows every legal requirement, every trustee authorization, every loophole. And she's been systematically eliminating anyone who could challenge her. Lorraine pulled out a file folder, spreading documents across the table. Trust paperwork, transfer authorizations, gala invitations listing Sidoni as primary organizer, and Kingsley as honored guest. Eleanor knew, Lorraine said quietly. Not the details, but the direction. She saw how Sidoni looked at money, how she talked about legacy. 6 months before she died, Eleanor told me, if Sidoni ever turns on Harlan, completely give him access to box 847. Until then, we wait. How long had Sidoni been planning this? 3 years since the townhouse transfer? 9 years since Kingsley married Eleanor and gave Sidoni access to billionaire-level legal resources? Or had she been calculating since childhood, waiting for the exact moment when millions would finally be within reach? You have 8 days until the gala, Lorraine said. 8 days to open that box, understand what Eleanor left you, and stop Sidoni legally. No mistakes, no shortcuts, no breaking the law. Because the moment you do, she wins. She handed me a photocopy of Eleanor's co-trustee authorization, my legal key to accessing the safety deposit box. I held the tiny brass key Eleanor had concealed in her watch, feeling its weight in my palm. 8 days to learn what my wife had hidden. 8 days to understand the full scope of my daughter's fraud. 8 days to stop it using nothing but paperwork, patience, and the law. But I had no idea what Eleanor had left for me to find. And some discoveries once made can never be undone. It took 24 hours to arrange the bank appointment. 24 hours of wondering what Eleanor had considered important enough to hide behind brass and steel. 24 hours too long. The vault room at Fifth Third Bank smelled like cold steel and other people's secrets, and the brass key Eleanor had hidden in her watch fit perfectly into safety deposit box 847. Gerald Brennan, the bank's compliance officer, was 50-something, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years ensuring safety deposit boxes were accessed by the right people for the right reasons. He checked Lorraine's identification 3 times, verified the co-trustee authorization against his records, and watched as I slid the tiny key into the lock. "Mr. Beckett." Gerald said, his voice neutral, but not unkind. "Per the co-trustee agreement filed with this box in October 2019, you and Ms. Prescott have joint access. The contents are legally yours to remove." October 2019, 1 month before Eleanor died. She'd been here in this vault room setting up this exact moment. The box slid out smooth and heavy. Inside a leather-bound diary, with Eleanor's name embossed on the cover in gold leaf. 2 sealed manila envelopes, each labeled in her handwriting, financial records certified copies. And a USB drive in a clear plastic case, a single word written on masking tape in Eleanor's careful script, "Insurance." Lorraine's hands shook as she touched the diary. Eleanor filed this box 6 months before she died. She knew Harlan, she knew what Sidoni was planning, and she documented everything. I picked up the USB drive. A folded note was taped to the case, the paper yellowed slightly with 4 years in the dark. "Play this alone first, then decide who needs to hear it. Trust no one who stands to gain. Insbo." Gerald handed me a pen, Eleanor's pen, also in the box, and I signed the access log with hands steadier than I expected. We carried everything out in a brown paper bag. The bank provided the kind you'd use for groceries, containing evidence of a 4-year conspiracy. Eleanor had spent the last 6 months of her life building a legal fortress around the truth, knowing she wouldn't live to defend it herself. She'd turned her body into a countdown timer and her evidence into a loaded gun, then hidden the trigger in a watch I'd wound every morning for 4 years. We sat in Lorraine's car in the bank parking lot as dusk fell over Columbus. November, cold seeped through the windows. I plugged the USB drive into Lorraine's laptop, and we waited for the files to load. 7 audio files, each labeled with a date, March 2019 through September 2019. I clicked the first one. Sidoni's voice filled the car, clear and unmistakable. Younger than at the wedding, but the same calculated precision. "The problem isn't Kingsley," she said. "The problem is my father. As long as he's legally connected to the family, he can challenge the transfer. We need him gone professionally, socially, legally." A second voice, female professional. "What timeline are we looking at? SC de Desaurus, Enikisto." I recognized that voice. Victoria Rothman, the attorney who delivered the trespass warning 3 days ago. 4 years, Sidoni answered. "We need to move slowly, establish patterns, document his instability. By the time we execute, he'll be so discredited that any challenge he makes will sound like the ravings of a bitter ex-husband trying to steal from his deceased wife's legacy." March 2019, 7 months before Eleanor died. My daughter had been planning this while her mother was still alive, still fighting the heart condition that would kill her by October. I clicked the next file. April 2019, Sidoni's voice again. "The townhouse transfer has to happen while Mom's still alive. If we wait until after, it looks suspicious. We frame it as estate planning, protecting family assets. He'll sign because he trusts her. He'll never check the deed." Lorraine's breath caught. "June 2020, that's when you lost the house. She'd been planning it for over a year." I clicked through the files. May 2019, Sidoni approaching Kingsley Wainwright, pitching him on a humanitarian foundation that would honor Eleanor's legacy. June 2019, mapping out the media strategy. July 2019, identifying which community members could be bought or pressured. August 2019, Victoria Rothman's voice. "What about your mother? She's still the primary trustee. If she suspects... Sidoni interrupted her tone flat. She won't be a factor much longer. Her heart condition is terminal. 6 months, maybe less. Once she's gone, the trust vulnerability window opens. 6 months, maybe less. Eleanor had heard this, had recorded it, had known her daughter was counting down the days until her death like an investor waiting for a stock to mature. I clicked the last file, September 28th, 2019, 17 days before Eleanor died. We execute at the humanitarian gala, Sidoni said. November 20th, 2023. 4 years is enough time to erase him completely and make me untouchable. By then, nobody will remember he ever existed. The wedding wasn't spontaneous cruelty. The trash bags weren't retaliation. The smear campaign wasn't panic. Sidoni had scheduled my destruction to the day 4 years ago, while her mother was still breathing. Lorraine closed her eyes. November 20th, 2023, she chose the date 4 years in advance. She's been working toward that gala for longer than most people plan a career. I pulled the USB drive out and set it on the dashboard. The laptop screen went dark, reflecting our faces in the parking lot security lights. Eleanor gave you proof, Lorraine said quietly. But how do you stop a daughter who's been playing this game for 4 years when you only have 6 days left? I looked at the brown paper bag containing Eleanor's diary and the sealed financial records, at the USB drive holding my daughter's voice from beyond my wife's grave, at Lorraine's face so much like Eleanor's asking the same question that was burning in my chest. We start, I said, with someone who has a federal badge. The answer, it turned out, started with a federal badge. The FBI field office opened at 8 a.m. I was there at 7:45, standing in the parking lot with Eleanor's brown paper bag of evidence, watching federal employees arrive for work, like this was any other Tuesday. For them it was. Special Agent Glenn Underwood studied Eleanor's certified bank records under the fluorescent lights of the FBI's Columbus field office, like a surgeon examining an X-ray that confirmed the tumor was real, malignant, and exactly where the patient said it would be. 47 and built like a filing cabinet, Glenn reviewed the documents I'd spread across his desk, with the kind of methodical focus that meant he'd already seen enough white-collar criminals to recognize the real thing. His office was windowless government-issue furniture walls covered in organizational charts and case timelines. The USB drive sat between us like evidence at a crime scene. Mr. Beckett. Glenn said, not looking up from the third page of Eleanor's certified financial statements. I've been tracking financial fraud for 23 years. This routing structure, it's not amateur work. Someone with serious legal and banking expertise designed this to be bulletproof. He pointed to a line in the records showing offshore account numbers, shell corporations in Delaware, routing through Cayman accounts. The whole system's designed to execute in a single synchronized transfer, professional grade. My daughter's 26, I said. She graduated from Harvard 3 years ago. How does she know how to... She doesn't, Glenn interrupted. But Kingsley Wainwright's corporate network does. He's got financial advisors who specialize in exactly this kind of structure. Legal right up until the moment it's not. The twist of understanding turned cold in my chest. Sidoni hadn't just been using Kingsley's name for social cover. She'd been using his entire financial infrastructure, his lawyers and accountants and offshore specialists building a theft machine with parts she couldn't have assembled alone. Glenn clicked through the audio files on the USB drive, his expression unchanging, as Sidoni's voice filled his office. When the September 2019 recording ended, the one where she chose the November 20th, 2023 date, he sat back in his chair. The gala signing is a legal trigger, he said. The moment your daughter's signature hits those foundation transition documents, the automated clearance sequence starts. By midnight, November 21st, the full trust value will be scattered across 14 jurisdictions and will spend the next decade trying to recover 10%. Can you stop it? We can stop this, Glenn said. But I need you to understand the investigation has to be federal, documented, airtight. The moment you step outside legal channels, the moment you confront her, directly threaten her, do anything that looks like harassment, given that protection order she filed, you give her lawyers the weapon to dismantle everything. Can you follow the rules for 6 more days? For the first time in 5 days, I felt something other than rage or grief. I felt the machinery of the law clicking into place behind me, slow, methodical, but unstoppable once it started moving. Eleanor had built the foundation. I'd provided the evidence. Now the federal government would provide the hammer. I can follow the rules, I said. Glenn handed me a business card. This is my direct line. You call me before you do anything. Anything. Understood? I drove back to the garage with Glenn's card in my pocket and Eleanor's empty brown paper bag on the passenger seat. The evidence was federal property now. The investigation was official. 6 days until the gala, and for the first time since the wedding, I had allies with badges. The courier was waiting when I pulled into the garage parking lot at 2:30 p.m. Young, maybe 25, corporate polo shirt and tablet for signatures. He'd been hired through a service that ensured he had no idea what he was delivering. "Mr. Harlan Beckett," he asked, reading from his screen. "That's me." He handed me a certified envelope, thick and expensive. "Sign here, please." I signed. He left. And I stood in my garage office looking at the return address Sidney Wainwright via Rothman Legal Associates. Inside, a bound document, 23 pages, professionally printed on premium paper. The cover page read, "Family Reconciliation and Settlement Agreement." The cover letter was handwritten in Sidney's flowing script. "Dad, I've thought about everything that happened at the wedding. I overreacted. We both said things we regret. Let's end this with dignity before it destroys what's left of our family. Please sign by 5 p.m. today, so we can both move forward with peace. Love, Sidney." I read through the agreement. The first 16 pages were conciliatory language about mutual misunderstandings, emotional distress, and the importance of family healing. Page 17 offered compensation, $150,000 cash paid within 30 days of execution, an apology letter for the public record, restoration of peaceful family relations. Page 21. Section 7, subsection D, buried in dense legal prose. Harlan Beckett hereby irrevocably waives disclaims and releases any and all present or future claims, rights, standing, or authority regarding the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust, any successor, vehicles, derivative foundations, or related estate instruments. This waiver is permanent, unconditional, and survives the death or incapacity of any party. One signature would erase me legally and forever. The signature line waited on page 23. A pen sat on my workbench next to the wrench I'd been using when the courier arrived. $150,000. An apology. Peace. And permanent irrevocable legal erasure from Eleanor's legacy. The agreement had been written by Victoria Rothman, the same attorney who'd handed me the trespass warning 4 days ago. Sidney hadn't sent a peace offering. She'd sent a final kill shot wrapped in sympathy and signed with love. The courier had left his business card. Call for pickup by 5 p.m. to ensure timely processing. I looked at the clock. 2:47 p.m. 3 hours until the deadline. The pen sat on my workbench. One tool builds engines. The other signs away your life. I picked up my phone and called Glenn Underwood instead. Because if Sidney was offering me money, it meant she was afraid. Glenn told me not to sign, not to engage, and to document everything. Then, Knox Archer texted me an hour later, urgent private meeting, Alone 4 p.m. cafe on Parsons Avenue. Glenn said to go, but keep my phone recording, so I went. Knox Archer was already sweating when I walked into the cafe on Parsons Avenue, and the envelope of $100 bills sitting on the table between us told me exactly how desperate Sidney had become. The cafe was nearly empty, deliberately chosen for privacy, a corner booth in the back where the espresso machine noise would cover conversation. Knox wore a button-down shirt that looked like it cost more than my truck payment, but his collar was damp with sweat despite the November cold outside. "Mr. Beckett," he said, not standing, not offering his hand. "Thank you for meeting me." I slid into the booth across from him. The envelope sat between us like evidence at a crime scene. I could see the edges of bills through the unsealed flap, hundreds neatly stacked. $75,000. Knox said, his voice steady, but his hands less so. "Cash today. You take it, you drive west, and you let your daughter live her life. Simple transaction, Mr. Beckett. Business, not personal." I didn't touch the envelope. "Sidoni sent you. And this is my offer, my attempt to resolve a family conflict that's spiraling out of control. You married her 6 days ago. This isn't your conflict to resolve." Knox's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to help you understand that continuing this crusade will only result in legal consequences for you. Harassment charges, restraining orders, possible criminal liability for interfering with legitimate business operations." The words came out rehearsed, coached. I heard Victoria Rothman's legal phrasing behind every sentence. "You memorized that speech this morning?" I asked. Knox's hand trembled as he lifted his coffee cup. For someone offering $75,000 and making threats, he looked like a man standing on a ledge, not someone in control. That's when I understood Knox wasn't offering this bribe from a position of strength. He was desperate, terrified, because he'd already done something he couldn't undo, and now he was trying to contain the damage before it destroyed him too. "How much did Sidney tell you about the trust structure?" I asked. Knox set his cup down too hard, coffee sloshing onto the saucer. "The foundation is legitimate. Eleanor's estate was properly managed. The gala is a standard philanthropic transition event. Everything is legal." "Then why are you here offering me cash to leave the States?" "Because you're making false accusations that could damage—" "Knox." I pulled a manila folder from my jacket and set it on the table. "When did you sign the offshore account paperwork, Seabarst?" His face went from flush to pale in under 3 seconds. "How much do you have to pay someone to make them disappear from their own daughter's life?" $75,000 apparently. The exact price Sidney had calculated I was worth not as a father, but as an obstacle. I opened the folder and slid Eleanor's certified photocopies across the table. Offshore account setup documentation from March 2019. Shell Corporation formation papers. Delaware and Cayman routing structures. "Page 3, I said. "Your signature authorizing the formation of Prescott Memorial Holdings, LLC. Your name is managing director. Your liability when the federal investigation, and there is a federal investigation, comes for someone to prosecute." Knox stared at the documents like they were a cancer diagnosis. His hand shook as he turned the pages. "She told me," his voice cracked. "She said these were standard estate planning vehicles. She said Kingsley's attorneys set them up. She said I was just a signatory for tax purposes." "Keep reading," I said. Page 5 listed 3 shell corporations. Page 7 showed the routing structure designed to move the trust funds through offshore accounts within hours of the November 20th gala signing. Page 9 had Knox's signature on every formation document authorizing him as the legal managing director with full financial authority. Sidoni's name appeared nowhere. Kingsley's name appeared nowhere. Just Knox Archer, orthopedic surgeon, managing director of companies designed to steal and launder $42 million. "They insulated themselves," Knox whispered. "I'm the only name on these documents." "You're the designated fall guy," I said. "When the FBI comes, and they are coming, they'll arrest the person whose signature authorizes the fraud. That's you. Sidoni walks away clean. Kingsley walks away clean. You go to federal prison." Knox stared at the documents, and I watched him understand Sidoni had built him a gallows, handed him the rope, and convinced him it was a ladder. The cafe's espresso machine hissed. Someone laughed at the counter, unaware they were witnessing a man's life collapsing in real time. "When did you sign these?" I asked. Knox's voice was barely audible. "March 2019. We'd been dating 4 months. She said Kingsley's estate planners needed a neutral third party. She said it was a formality. She said—" He stopped, understanding flooding his face. Knox had married Sidney 6 days ago. She'd made him a felon 4 years ago. He just hadn't known it until I showed him the receipt. "The FBI has these documents," I said. "They have recordings of Sidoni planning this in 2019. They know you signed, but they also know you didn't understand what you were signing. There's a difference between being a co-conspirator and being used." Knox looked up at me, and I saw the calculation running behind his eyes. Save himself or stay loyal to the woman who turned him into a criminal without his knowledge. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Nothing," I said. "I want you to understand what you married, what you signed, and what happens on November 20th if that gala proceeds as planned." I stood, leaving the $75,000 on the table. "You've got 4 days to decide which side of this you want to be on when the federal charges start dropping," I said. "Choose carefully." Knox left the cafe without the money, walking like a man who just realized he was already dead, and the autopsy was scheduled for November 20th. I watched him drive away, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and I knew exactly what he'd do next. Call Sidney, tell her the bribe failed, and warn her that her father knew about the offshore accounts. Which meant she'd stop offering money and start bringing the hammer down. The hammer fell at dawn. Knox called Sidney the moment he left the cafe. I knew because the hammer fell exactly 12 hours later, timed with the precision of someone who'd spent the night mobilizing every resource they controlled. The hammer fell at 6:47 a.m. when 4 city vehicles pulled into my garage lot simultaneously. Environmental services, zoning enforcement, tax compliance, and fire safety. Each inspector armed with clipboards, cameras, and the kind of coordinated purpose that doesn't happen by accident. Supervisor Morton from Environmental Services had the bureaucratic efficiency of someone executing orders he didn't question, photographing violations he'd been told to find. He spent 20 minutes examining the oil collection tank I'd used legally for 28 years, documenting every angle with his department-issued camera. Yet this storage vessel isn't compliant with current environmental standards, Morton said, writing on his citation form with the mechanical precision of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. That tank was inspected and approved in 2021, I said. That standards changed in 2022. You should have received notification. I never received notification, but arguing with Morton wouldn't change the citation, the fine, or the fact that someone with serious municipal connections had orchestrated this assault overnight. The zoning inspector found violations in my commercial signage. The tax auditor delivered a notice requiring 3 years of documentation within 10 business days. The fire safety officer cited my equipment storage configuration as a potential hazard to adjacent properties. By 10 a.m., my phone started ringing. Dave Hollis from Columbus Auto Supply had supplied my parts for 19 years, and the apology in his voice when he suspended my account told me the pressure from downtown had been significant. At Harlan, I got pressure from downtown, Dave said. Corporate says I have to suspend your account until the city issues clear you. I'm sorry, man. It's not my call. 3 more suppliers called by 11 a.m. Same script, same apologies, same outcome. The coordinated timing, 4 departments arriving within minutes of each other, suppliers suspending credit within hours, revealed something worse than Sidney's money. It revealed Kingsley Wainwright's deep political leverage. Someone had spent the night making calls, pulling municipal strings, leveraging favors and threats to execute a synchronized demolition of my business before sunrise. By lunchtime, my phone showed 47 new 1-star Google reviews, all posted within the same 3-hour window, all anonymous, all using the exact phrase, unsafe practices. Someone had hired a reputation management firm to destroy me. Sidoni wasn't just attacking my business. She was performing surgery without anesthesia, systematically severing every connection that made me viable in this city. Suppliers, customers' reputation, livelihood. By sunset, Beckett's Auto Repair would be legally open but functionally dead. I called Glenn Underwood at 1 p.m. He told me to document everything and not to retaliate. Then he gave me a name, Bryce Gallagher. Independent journalist, Glenn said. Covers financial corruption for regional online media. He's got a following. Kingsley's money can't silence. Use him. Bryce Gallagher, 43, and carrying the permanent skepticism of someone who'd spent 2 decades verifying other people's lies, worked out of a basement studio with equipment he'd bought himself, and a subscriber base that numbered in the tens of thousands. His office smelled like coffee and electronics walls covered in printouts and timeline charts for stories he was tracking. Glenn sent you, Bryce said when I arrived at 2 p.m., which means you've got something verifiable and someone powerful is trying to bury you. I spread Eleanor's certified documents across his desk, the offshore routing structures, the shell corporations with Knox's signature, the timeline showing Sidney planning the fraud 4 years in advance. Bryce studied the papers with the focus of a jeweler, examining diamonds for flaws. After 20 minutes, he looked up. This is federal-grade fraud, he said, and you want me to report on it before the gala. I want you to ask questions, I said, publicly, on the record, questions she can't ignore. Bryce leaned back in his chair. We don't accuse, we don't speculate. We report that questions have been raised by documented sources. Let her be the one who escalates. Let her create the evidence trail. We spent 3 hours crafting 3 minutes of content. Every word verified, every claim documented, every legal exposure eliminated. At 6 p.m., Bryce positioned himself in front of his camera, adjusted the lighting, and clicked Start Broadcast. Good evening. Investigative reporters have obtained documentation suggesting certain Columbus area charitable foundations may be routing donor funds through unregulated offshore trusts. Questions have been raised specifically regarding the November 20th Wainwright Foundation Gala and its claimed $42 million community endowment. Sources indicate federal financial investigators may be reviewing formation documents for Delaware-registered entities linked to the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust. This broadcast goes live to 12,000 regional subscribers, and it's archived permanently with verified timestamps. The moment she responds, and she will respond, everything she says becomes part of the federal record. The segment ended with 5 words that would haunt Sidney, more details emerging before November 20th. I watched the viewer count climb in real time. 3,400, 5,200, 8,900. The comments section filled with questions, speculation demands for more information. Bryce hit the end broadcast button and looked at me across his cluttered desk. In chess, when you sacrifice a pawn, it's only a mistake if it doesn't force your opponent into a worse position. You just sacrificed your garage. This better force her hand. The broadcast wasn't just psychological bait. It was a legal trap designed to force Sidney into creating a time-stamped public defense that Glenn's federal investigation could use as evidence of consciousness of guilt and obstruction. Every word she said now would be documented, archived, and admissible. My phone buzzed at 6:47 p.m., exactly 12 hours after the inspectors arrived, exactly 32 minutes after the broadcast ended. Sidoni's name glowed on the screen. 3 days until the November 20th gala, and my daughter was about to tell me exactly how far she was willing to go. I let it ring twice before answering. Her voice was venom wrapped in silk. I answered on the 3rd ring. Glenn Underwood had told me to keep my phone on speaker, a digital recorder running beside it, and to let her talk as long as she wanted. Every word was evidence now. My daughter's voice on the phone was cold, calculated, and finally, after 26 years of performance, completely honest. "I watched your pathetic little broadcast," Sidney said. "No greeting, no pretense of daughterly concern. Bryce Gallagher, independent media, very clever dad. Except you've miscalculated." I said nothing. The recorder's red light blinked steadily in the darkness of my garage office. "You think you're defending Mom's legacy?" Sidoni continued, her voice sharp as surgical steel. "You are Mom's legacy, a stubborn, small-minded relic who never understood that some people are meant to build empires and some people are meant to change oil. Guess which one you are?" The venom in her voice wasn't anger. It was something colder, pathological. "Do you know what it's like?" She said, her words clipped and precise. "To stand in a room full of real success and have someone ask if you're really Harlan Beckett's daughter, like being related to you is some kind of punchline. I've spent 9 years erasing that stain, and I'm not letting you drag me back." "Eleanor would be ashamed of what you've become," I said quietly. Sidoni laughed. The sound was glass breaking. "Eleanor married Kingsley because she finally understood what I've always known. Bloodlines matter, status matters, and sentiment is just poverty in a pretty package. She saw what you'd never be and chose accordingly." That wasn't true. Eleanor had married Kingsley 2 years after our divorce, and she'd done it because she was lonely and he was kind to her. But Sidney had rewritten the story to fit her pathology. "The money isn't yours," Sidoni said. "It was never yours. Accept it and disappear, or I will bury you so deep you'll wish you had. The inspectors this morning were a warning. The suppliers were a warning. I own this city now. The connections, the leverage, the people who matter. You're obsolete blue-collar trash, and on November 20th, I'm taking what's mine." The call lasted 8 minutes and 43 seconds. Every word recorded, every threat documented, every piece of contempt preserved in digital format that would play in federal court. Sidoni's attack wasn't emotional rage. It was cold, pathological class contempt, revealing she genuinely believed working-class people were biologically inferior, and her father's blue-collar existence was a genetic embarrassment she'd spent 9 years trying to surgically remove from her identity. I sat in the darkness of the garage office listening to my daughter's voice on the recorder, her real voice, the one she'd hidden for 26 years, behind birthday cards and Sunday dinners and the word Dad. Eleanor had been right to build the dead man's switch. She'd known exactly what our daughter was. The next morning, I brought the recording to Glenn Underwood at the FBI's Secure Operations Room. The space was windowless walls covered in timeline charts and financial flow diagrams, showing the routing structure of Sidoni's fraud. Glenn played the recording once, his expression unchanging. Then he turned to his computer and pulled up something I hadn't expected. Mr. Beckett. Glenn said, "Your daughter made one critical mistake. She believed that hiring expensive lawyers to structure the fraud made her untouchable. But digital forensics doesn't care about legal language. It cares about who clicked the mouse." He turned his monitor toward me. The screen showed a forensics report spanning hundreds of pages: device logs, cloud storage access records, banking metadata, IP addresses, timestamps. 4 years of digital breadcrumbs Sidney had left without knowing they were permanent. Every document initiating a shell corporation traces to her laptop, Glenn said, scrolling through highlighted entries. Every routing instruction to her phone. Every automated transfer schedule shows her device fingerprint. She built the entire structure herself, thinking she was being careful. She created a perfect evidence trail. The twist of satisfaction turned cold in my chest. Sidney had spent 4 years building an elaborate legal fortress to protect herself, hiring attorneys and accountants and offshore specialists. But she'd done all the actual work herself, clicking through formation documents at 2 a.m., setting up routing protocols from her personal devices, never understanding that every action left a permanent record. Glenn pulled up a specific entry. March 18, 2019, 2:47 a.m. Her laptop accessing Cayman routing protocols. 3 weeks after your wife recorded the first phone conversation. 7 months before Eleanor died. 4 years before the money would move. Sidoni had been clicking the mouse on her own prison sentence. "The FBI doesn't need confessions or cooperating witnesses," Glenn continued. "We have something better than money itself. It left an unforgeable trail, and your daughter's own devices signed the confession in metadata. Every transaction, every transfer, every automation and sequence, all traceable to her personal equipment." He pulled up another screen showing the operational timeline. November 20th, 7:45 p.m. "The gala signing ceremony begins," Glenn said. "At 7:43 p.m., 2 minutes before we execute federal preservation orders, freezing every account in the routing chain. She signs the documents at 8 p.m., believing the automation will execute overnight. By 8:01 p.m., she'll discover the money never moved, and the FBI will be waiting in the lobby." I looked at the timeline the forensics reports the 4 years of evidence Sidney had created, without knowing she was building her own cage. "She walks on stage thinking she's won," Glenn said. "She signs the papers in front of 300 witnesses, and she doesn't know until it's over that she just confessed to federal fraud in front of the entire Columbus elite. 2 days until the gala. 2 days until Sidney stood on stage before the city's wealthy and signed documents transferring wealth she believed would vanish into offshore accounts before anyone could stop her. But the money would be frozen at 7:43 p.m., and the federal agents would be waiting in the lobby. The trap was set. The evidence was airtight, and my daughter had built it all herself, one mouse click at a time. All that remained was making sure she walked into it. Making sure she walked into it meant building the cage so perfectly she wouldn't see the bars until the door locked behind her. Glenn Underwood called the final briefing for 8 p.m., 12 hours before the gala, in a secure room where the only decorations were floor plans and federal timelines. The floor plans of the Greater Columbus Convention Center covered the entire operations table, marked with red circles for federal agent positioning, blue squares for media access points, and one black X where Sidney would sign her name and discover the wealth had vanished. 3 additional FBI agents from Glenn's financial crimes unit sat at the operations table, seasoned professionals whose faces I wouldn't remember because they weren't supposed to be memorable, just effective. Lorraine sat to my left, Bryce to my right, both of them studying the tactical documents like students preparing for an exam that had no retakes. Glenn stood at the head of the table, a laser pointer in his hand, and the kind of controlled energy that meant he'd run this scenario in his head 1,000 times. 12 hours until doors open, Glenn said. "Let's walk through this one more time. No assumptions, no shortcuts, no improvisation." He clicked the pointer, and a timeline appeared on the projection screen behind him. 7:43 p.m., Glenn said, tapping the first entry. "Federal preservation orders execute automatically across 14 offshore accounts in the routing chain. The freeze is programmed, verified, and irreversible. By the time Sidoni Wainwright signs the transfer documents at 8 p.m., every dollar is already locked. She won't know until her phone starts buzzing with automated failure alerts 2 minutes later." Bryce leaned forward, My stream goes live at 7:50 10 minutes before the signing. 12,000 verified subscribers watching in real time, permanently archived, legally time-stamped. If she says one word defending the foundation or the transfer, it becomes federal evidence. That was the genius of the trap. The federal strategy wasn't just to freeze the money, it was designed to force Sidney into publicly defending herself on livestream, before she knew she was caught creating irrefutable evidence of consciousness of guilt that she'd generate herself, trying to protect her status. Lorraine touched the co-trustee authorization papers in front of her. The moment she attempts to sign, I file formal objection as Eleanor's designated representative. Even if every technical aspect failed, which it won't, my objection alone triggers a mandatory 90-day legal hold. She built a trap with no exits. Glenn clicked through to contingency scenarios. If she cancels the signing, which she won't, because canceling after 4 years of preparation and public announcements would destroy her credibility, the cancellation itself becomes evidence of consciousness of guilt. If she attempts to flee, we have surveillance on every exit. If she tries to alter documents, last-minute originals are already secured with court certification. We weren't planning a confrontation. We were building a legal mousetrap with 17 precision components, each one calibrated to snap closed at exactly 7:43 p.m. And my daughter was walking toward the cheese with a pen in her hand and 300 witnesses watching. One of the FBI agents, his badge read Supervisory Agent Caldwell, spoke up. What about the husband, Knox Archer? He's legally implicated in the shell corporations. Will he interfere? He won't, I said. I showed him the documents 4 days ago. He knows he's the designated fall guy. He'll either stay silent or cooperate, but he won't defend her. Glenn turned to me. Your job tomorrow is the hardest. You sit in that ballroom, you watch your daughter walk into federal custody, and you do nothing except exist. No confrontations, no speeches, no emotional outbursts. Can you do that? Yes, I said. I need you to understand what I'm asking, Glenn continued. You'll watch her sign the documents. You'll watch her face when the failure alerts start coming through. You'll watch her realize the money's gone and the FBI is waiting in the lobby. And you cannot react. You cannot approach her. You cannot give her attorneys any ammunition to claim harassment, coercion, or improper conduct. Can you sit there and watch your only child arrested? The room went silent. Yes, I said again. Glenn held my gaze for 3 seconds, then nodded. This operation has 17 moving parts and 0 margin for error. If anyone improvises, if anyone acts on emotion, if anyone steps outside legal procedure for even 30 seconds, Sidoni's attorneys will dismantle 4 years of evidence on technicalities. We do this by the book, or we don't do it at all. He walked through the timeline 3 more times. Radio codes for each phase, documentation procedures, media coordination protocols, the positioning of federal agents in the lobby close enough to intervene immediately far enough back to avoid appearance of intimidation. At 8:02 p.m. tomorrow, Sidoni's phone would receive 14 automated messages. Transfer failed, account frozen by federal order. At 8:05 p.m., Glenn would step forward in the convention center lobby and serve her with official notice of federal investigation. 300 elite witnesses would watch it happen. Bryce's live stream would document every second. The operation had a perfect failsafe, even if Sidoni suspected the trap and tried to cancel the signing. The cancellation itself, after 4 years of preparation and public announcements, would become federal evidence of consciousness of guilt and conspiracy, meaning she was caught whether she signed or not. The team synchronized watches at 11:30 p.m. Glenn handed out final documentation packets, court orders, preservation notices, radio frequency cards. By 11:45, every player knew their position. Every document was sealed. Every federal order was pre-signed and ready to execute. The machine was built, calibrated, and aimed. Tomorrow at 7:43 p.m., it would activate. Glenn dismissed the team at 11:45 p.m., and Lorraine drove me back to the garage in silence. She didn't ask if I was ready to watch my only daughter arrested. She didn't ask if I'd sleep tonight. We both already knew the answers. 12 hours until the Greater Columbus Convention Center doors opened. 12 hours until Sidney stood on stage in front of the city's elite, believing she was minutes from untouchable wealth and permanent erasure of her blue-collar origins. 12 hours until she discovered Eleanor had built a better trap than she ever imagined, and her father had been patient enough to let her walk into it. I pulled on the same funeral suit I'd worn to her wedding and checked Eleanor's watch one last time. The second hand ticked forward with mechanical precision. 11:47. The exact time Eleanor had died, frozen forever in the watch casing. But tomorrow, at 7:43 p.m. time, would move forward again. Time moved forward. 12 hours became 6, then 3, then 1. By 6 p.m., I was standing on the red carpet outside the Greater Columbus Convention Center, and Eleanor's watch was no longer frozen. It was counting down. The red carpet was a river of tailored suits and evening gowns flowing past camera flashes and champagne fountains, and I walked into it wearing the same funeral suit I'd worn to my daughter's wedding, Eleanor's watch heavy on my wrist, counting down to 7:43 p.m. Lorraine walked beside me, her evening dress simple, and her expression carved from granite. We approached the entrance where private security guards checked tablets against an exclusive guest list, the kind of checkpoint designed to separate people who mattered from people who didn't. The lead guard looked up as I gave my name. "I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice professionally apologetic, "but Harlan Beckett is specifically flagged as not authorized for entry. I'll have to ask you to step aside." Lorraine stepped forward before I could respond, pulling an envelope from her purse. This invitation was issued directly by the Wainwright Foundation in October under Eleanor Prescott Beckett's co-trustee provisions. I'm Lorraine Prescott, legal co-trustee of the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust. Check with your legal team. I'll wait. She handed him 3 documents: the original October invitation, court-certified estate documentation, and a letter from the probate court confirming her authority to represent Eleanor's interests at any event involving the trust. The guard studied the papers, then looked at his tablet, then back at the papers. The security supervisor, whose badge identified him as Craig, had the uncomfortable responsibility of deciding whether court-certified legal documents trumped the boss's daughter's guest list. "I need to radio for clearance," Craig said. We waited, 5 minutes in the cold November air, while Craig spoke into his radio in hushed, urgent tones. Through the glass lobby doors, I could see the event already underway. Guests milling with champagne waiters, circulating with appetizers, chandeliers casting golden light over Columbus's elite. And I could see Sidney. She stood near the lobby bar talking with someone I didn't recognize, and the moment Craig pulled out his radio, her eyes snapped to the entrance. She saw me. She saw Lorraine. And her expression shifted from shock to barely concealed rage. Sidoni had anticipated everything except the one thing Eleanor had built into the trust 4 years ago: Lorraine's unrevocable legal standing. Security blocking me wasn't random oversight. Sidoni had specifically programmed my name into the system as not authorized, proving she'd anticipated I might attend and taken preemptive steps. But she hadn't accounted for her grandmother's sister, holding documentation that superseded any guest list. Craig's radio crackled. He listened, nodded, spoke confirmation codes. Then he looked at Lorraine. "Wesdick Corporate Counsel confirms your authority," he said. "Both of you are cleared for entry. I apologize for the delay." We walked through the doors, and I was inside. After 10 days of being erased from my home, my business, my community, and my daughter's life, I was standing in the same room where she was about to commit federal fraud, and she couldn't make me leave. Eleanor had built that into the foundation documents 4 years ago, knowing this exact moment would come. By 7:30 p.m., the main ballroom was packed. 300 guests in formal wear, crystal chandeliers reflecting off champagne glasses, the air heavy with expensive perfume and ambition. Lorraine and I took seats in the back row as Sidney was introduced to applause and camera flashes. Please welcome our keynote speaker, visionary philanthropist and founder of the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Foundation, Sidney Wainwright. Endusta sik spief Boris. My daughter took the stage in a gown that probably cost more than my truck, and the spotlights made her look like American royalty. Kingsley Wainwright stood beside her, beaming paternal pride. My mother taught me that wealth without purpose is just numbers on paper. Sidney said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd rehearsed this speech 100 times. Tonight, we honor her vision by ensuring the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust serves the community she loved, the working families, the mechanics, the teachers, the people who build this city with their hands. The crowd murmured approval. Sidoni continued describing vocational training programs, legal aid clinics, healthcare initiatives. Every word a lie, every program a facade. The money was routed offshore, designed to vanish into Cayman accounts within hours of tonight's signing. Tonight's ceremony will transition outdated family trust structures into a modern, accountable, charitable vehicle, Sidoni said, tears glistening in her eyes. A vehicle that serves those who need it most, not those who inherited it by accident of birth. She was magnificent, convincing, selfless. The humanitarian speech was so perfectly crafted using Eleanor's actual values and genuine community language that it made her look like a saint, meaning when the fraud was exposed in minutes, the betrayal would be exponentially more devastating to her reputation. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. The mayor applauded. The foundation board applauded. 300 of Columbus's elite rose to their feet for the woman who was using her dead mother's name to steal her dead mother's money. Lorraine leaned close and whispered, 13 minutes until the freeze. She's using your mother's name to steal your mother's money. Stay calm. Let her finish. Let her sign the papers. Let her build the cage herself. How many people in that ballroom knew they were applauding a performance? How many of Columbus's elite actually believed Sidoni cared about mechanics and teachers and working families? Or did they just not care as long as the fraud was elegant and the champagne was expensive? Sidoni finished her speech to thunderous applause and stepped to the signing table where 3 leather-bound documents waited under television lights. Photographers moved into position. The foundation board arranged themselves behind her for the official ceremony. She looked out over the crowd, past the mayor, past the foundation board, past Kingsley, and her eyes found mine in the back row. She smiled. Not the daughter's smile I remembered from childhood, but the smile of someone who believed she'd already won, who thought she owned not just the money, but the law itself. She picked up the ceremonial pen, positioned it over the first signature line, and paused for the cameras. She had no idea that in exactly 11 minutes, every account in her offshore network would freeze solid. But first, she had to sign her name. She didn't sign, not immediately, because at 7:45 p.m., 2 minutes after the federal freeze had already executed across 14 offshore jurisdictions. Though Sidoni didn't know it yet, I walked through the backstage VIP corridor, carrying a leather document folder marked Beckett Automotive, Proprietary Engineering, Patents Estimated Value, $840,000. I positioned myself where she'd have to pass me on her way to the signing table, conspicuous, deliberate, the folder visible. Sidoni saw me immediately. Knox was beside her adjusting his cufflinks with hands that wouldn't stay steady, and when she stopped in the corridor, he nearly collided with her. "What are you doing back here?" Sidoni demanded. I held up the folder, consulting with attorneys about protecting the last assets Eleanor left me. Her eyes locked onto the folder like a hawk spotting movement in tall grass. "What assets?" 30 years of custom automotive engineering patents, I said calmly. Transmission modifications, suspension designs, fuel efficiency improvements. Eleanor made sure they stayed separate from the trust when we divorced. They're the only thing you can't take from me. Sidoni's expression shifted, calculation replacing contempt. She stepped closer, and I could see the predatory recognition in her eyes. If she could force those patents into tonight's transfer documents, she'd take everything. Literally everything. Not just Eleanor's money, but my life's work, leaving me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and a garage full of violations. "I can't take..." Sidoni's smile was razor sharp. "Dad, if those patents were developed during your marriage to Mom, they're community property connected to the estate. Victoria Rothman appeared from around the corner, tablet in hand, as if she'd been waiting for exactly this cue. "Can we add IP assets to tonight's consolidation?" Sidoni asked. Victoria studied the folder, her attorney's mind already calculating angles. "Ms. Wainwright, incorporating intellectual property requires amended documentation. I'll need to verify the patent registrations, confirm estate connectivity draft addendum language. 15 minutes minimum." Sidoni didn't hesitate. "Do it. I want everything. Push the signing to 8:15. She'd just bought the FBI 12 extra minutes and didn't realize it. Knox stood frozen behind Sidoni, his face the color of old newspaper. His hand drifted toward his phone pocket, then stopped. He was afraid to check his messages in front of her, afraid of what the failure notifications might say, afraid that the offshore accounts should have activated by now, but somehow hadn't. Greed is a predator's weakness. It makes you chase prey even when you should be watching for the trap. I'd just waved $840,000 in patents in front of my daughter, and she'd bitten so hard, she'd delayed her own timeline, giving Glenn Underwood 12 extra minutes to position federal agents, while she fantasized about taking my last wrench. Sidoni's pathological greed was so complete that even minutes before her planned triumph, she couldn't resist delaying the signing to steal worthless patents wanting not just victory, but total annihilation, inadvertently giving the FBI more positioning time while thinking she was seizing additional spoils. Victoria disappeared with the folder to verify patent numbers that didn't need verifying. Sidney turned to Knox. "Let's go check with the venue coordinator," she said. "Make sure they can accommodate the delay." Knox nodded and left walking like a man heading to his own execution. The moment he was gone, Sidney looked at me. "You really thought those patents would save you?" she asked quietly. "You really thought I'd let you keep anything Eleanor touched? I thought you'd want to know what you're stealing," I said. She smiled. "I already know, everything." At 8:05 p.m. with the signing, now delayed to 8:15, Sidney made her calculated move to the press area. 4 regional journalists covering the gala, 2 print, 1 local TV, 1 digital media, had been corralled by Sidoni's PR team into the press briefing corner near the ballroom entrance, notebooks and cameras, ready for what they thought would be a feel-good charity story. Sidoni positioned herself in front of them, her expression shifting to concerned transparency. "I want to address something difficult." She began, her voice carrying the practiced vulnerability of someone who'd rehearsed this. "My biological father is here tonight uninvited, and I need to be transparent with you about our family situation. He's struggling with the transition of my late mother's estate into proper charitable structures, and his behavior has become concerning." The journalist's pens moved across notebooks. Cameras adjusted focus. The city's investigation into his business, which he characterizes as harassment, actually revealed serious compliance issues. Sidoni continued. "The settlement offer he rejected was generous. His presence here tonight, after we asked him to stay away, demonstrates a pattern we can no longer ignore for the sake of family privacy." One journalist raised her hand. "Are you saying he's dangerous?" Sidoni's pause was perfectly timed. 2 seconds of calculated concern. "I'm saying we've had to involve security and legal counsel," she said carefully. "I hope tonight ends peacefully, but I wanted you to understand the context if difficulties arise." Every word was recorded, every implication documented, every careful phrase building a narrative that positioned Harlan as the unstable aggressor and Sidney as the concerned victim, protecting her mother's charitable legacy from a man who couldn't accept that he'd lost. The narrative was perfectly constructed if the federal operation failed. By even the smallest procedural error, her recorded statements provided grounds to arrest Harlan for harassment, extortion, and stalking. She was building a legal shield in real time, creating reasonable doubt that she was the criminal, while framing him as the dangerous one. If Glenn's team made one procedural error, one improperly filed document, one agent stepping outside jurisdiction, one technical mistake in the preservation orders, Sidoni's press statement would become the legal basis for my arrest. I'd walked into the lion's den holding evidence of her crimes, and she'd just built a cage with my name on it. I stood in the corridor watching journalists type her quotes into their phones, watching her construct the narrative that would either expose her or destroy me, depending on whether Glenn's operation was as airtight as he'd promised. The signing had been pushed to 8:15 p.m. The federal freeze had already executed at 7:43 p.m., and my daughter had just spent 5 minutes telling the press I was dangerous, unstable, and obsessed, which meant when she discovered the money was gone, she'd have a pre-built explanation that blamed me. But first, the money had to disappear. The money disappeared at 7:43 p.m. By 8:12 p.m., it still hadn't reappeared, and Sidney still didn't know. I stood in the convention center's media control room, watching Glenn Underwood present official federal preservation orders to the venue operations director and legal counsel, while Bryce Gallagher's independent live stream counter ticked past 12,000 verified subscribers. The public reveal was now irreversible, and Sidney remained completely unaware the money had vanished 30 minutes ago. Glenn spread the federal documents across the control room table with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. Court seals, federal magistrate signatures, asset freeze authorizations across 14 jurisdictions. These preservation orders were executed at 7:43 p.m., Glenn said to the venue staff. The Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust is under active federal investigation for wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. All associated accounts are frozen. The signing ceremony scheduled for 8:15 cannot proceed as planned. The operations director looked at the legal counsel. The legal counsel looked at the documents. Neither of them looked happy about becoming part of a federal case, but the paperwork was airtight. Bryce adjusted his camera angle, speaking quietly into his microphone for the live stream audience. We're witnessing federal investigators present preservation orders to convention center management. The trust in question, Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial, valued at $42 million. Allegations include document forgery and offshore routing schemes. This broadcast is being archived with verified timestamps. 12,300 subscribers now. The number kept climbing. I watched the security monitor showing conference room 7. Sidney sat at a table with Victoria Rothman, reviewing what I assumed were the amended patent documents. She looked calm, confident, completely unaware that every offshore account in her routing chain had been frozen solid for 32 minutes. The venue operations director's radio crackled with security chatter, someone requesting bottled water for the trust signing party in conference room 7. Sidney's world still revolved around an 8:15 p.m. ceremony that would transfer exactly nothing. Glenn turned to me. The delay to 8:15 worked in our favor. Sidney requested extra time, thinking she needed to manage her narrative and incorporate your patents. But the delay gave us additional buffer to ensure every freeze executed before confrontation. The irony twisted cold in my chest. Sidney's greed, her pathological need to take not just Eleanor's trust, but my life's work, had accidentally strengthened the federal operation. She'd delayed her own signing to steal worthless patents, giving Glenn's team 12 extra minutes they hadn't even needed. All banks confirmed, I asked. Every institution executed at 7:43, Glenn said. Cayman, Delaware, Switzerland, Luxembourg. 14 accounts, 14 jurisdictions, 14 freeze confirmations. The automation she built was perfect. It just froze the money instead of moving it. Bryce's viewer count hit 13,000. I needed 60 seconds to process what Glenn had just confirmed. 12,000 people now knew about the trust dispute, and Sidney sat 30 yards away, building her victim narrative while the money had been frozen since 7:43 p.m. The weight of 2 decades pressed against my chest. What would you do if you discovered your child prepared to destroy everyone in their path? Drop your answer below. I'm reading every response. Because what Glenn showed me next changed everything I thought I understood about betrayal. Some details of federal evidence have been altered to protect investigative integrity. Glenn's tablet screen lit up with recovered email drafts, and I recognized Sidoni's writing style immediately. We need to show you something, Glenn said, pulling up a folder marked Contingency Evidence, Recovered Devices. The first email was dated November 18th, 2023, 2 days ago. Subject line, Concerns about KM's influence. KM Kingsley Wainwright. These were draft emails we recovered from your daughter's phone, Glenn said. Never sent but saved. She was building a backup narrative in case the primary fraud was discovered. I read the first draft. I'm writing this with a heavy heart, but I can no longer stay silent about Kingsley's manipulation of my late mother's estate. I discovered he'd been forging signatures on trust documents using his corporate attorneys to structure transfers I didn't fully understand. I was young grieving, and he took advantage. The email continued for 3 paragraphs, meticulously constructed, to position Kingsley as the mastermind and Sidney as his naive victim. Glenn swiped to the next draft. This one detailed how Kingsley had independently contacted attorneys and pressured Sidney to sign documents she didn't comprehend. The language was perfect, vulnerable without being weak, detailed without being technical. She was preparing to destroy him, I said. Glenn's index finger had a callus from pen-clicking the small tick of a man who'd spent 30 years documenting other people's worst decisions. He clicked twice before showing me the email dated November 18th, 2023, subject line, Concerns about KM's influence. Kingsley Wainwright has been completely cooperative with our investigation, Glenn said. He provided his corporate financial records voluntarily 2 weeks ago. He had no knowledge of the shell corporations, no involvement in the offshore routing, no participation in the forgeries. Your daughter used his name and reputation to bypass banking protocols, but kept him legally insulated from the actual fraud until she needed a fall guy. The backup plan revealed Sidonie's complete moral calculus. She'd prepared to sacrifice not just her father, the grease-stained mechanic she was ashamed of, but also her stepfather, the billionaire who'd paid for her education and treated her like his own daughter. Anyone in her path was expendable. This evidence strengthens the federal case, Glenn said. It demonstrates consciousness of guilt and willingness to commit additional fraud to avoid prosecution. She didn't just plan to steal the money she planned, who to blame when she got caught. I stared at the tablet screen at my daughter's careful handwriting, constructing a lie that would have destroyed an innocent man's reputation and possibly sent him to prison. Glenn closed the tablet and met my eyes. She built an escape route that would have sent an innocent man to prison, he said. Are you ready to watch us bring her into this room and show her there's no escape route left? I said yes, but the confrontation Glenn wanted private controlled, documented in a federal control room, wasn't the confrontation Eleanor had prepared me for. The real reckoning had to happen in front of 300 witnesses in the ballroom, where Sidonie stood at the height of her triumph, believing she owned not just the money, but the narrative itself. Eleanor's watch sat cold in my palm, 11:47 p.m., frozen the night she died, and I had 90 seconds to decide whether asking one question would send my only child to federal prison. I sat near the VIP stage, seating Lorraine beside me, while the ballroom filled with the hum of 300 guests finishing dessert and champagne. The foundation presentation had run long, Sidonie milking every moment of her humanitarian performance, and now she stood at the podium bathed in spotlight, radiant with the confidence of someone who believed victory was already secured. Lorraine leaned close, her voice barely audible over the ambient noise. The federal freeze is done, but the community needs to hear it from you, Eleanor's husband. You have standing. I don't. She's still my daughter, I said quietly. 26 years old. One question ends her life. Silence ends Eleanor's, Lorraine said. Which woman do you choose to honor? The question hung between us like Eleanor's watch, frozen waiting, demanding an answer that couldn't be unmade. I'd been given a choice at the wedding 10 days ago. Stay silent and watch Sidonie erase me, or speak up and risk everything. I'd chosen silence then. I'd stood in the back row and let security escort me like trash. I'd let her take my home, my business, my community, my name. But Eleanor had built the watch. Eleanor had hidden the key. Eleanor had documented everything and left me a timer that would activate exactly when I needed it most. She'd known this moment would come, and she'd prepared me for it 4 years before her death. Lorraine touched my arm. She seated you here deliberately. VIP section, clear, sightline to the audience microphone. Glenn and I coordinated the timing. Your question comes during live Q&A, creating undeniable public record. Everything's positioned. You just have to stand up. The twist of understanding turned in my chest. This wasn't accidental seating. Lorraine and Glenn had orchestrated this moment, the public forum, the live broadcast, the 300 witnesses, so that when I asked the question, Sidonie couldn't make it disappear. Sidonie's voice carried through the sound system, warm and grateful. Before we close tonight's ceremony, I want to open the floor for questions about the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Foundation's mission and our commitment to working families across Ohio. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Cameras adjusted angles. Bryce Gallagher's live stream, I could see the viewer count on screens mounted near the stage, showed 12,300 viewers. 73 years of life boil down to singular moments when you choose which version of yourself walks out of the room. I stood Eleanor's watch still in my left hand and became the man she married instead of the father Sidonie needed. I walked down the aisle toward the audience microphone stand positioned in the center of the ballroom. My funeral suit felt heavy. My legs felt steady. 300 faces turned to watch me approach. Sidonie saw me walking. Her smile flickered but held. I reached the microphone, tapped it once. The sound carried through the ballroom speakers with a hollow thump that silenced the remaining conversations. Sidonie. I said, my voice calm and clear. Can you verify for everyone here the exact source of your foundation's $42 million seed capital? The ballroom went still, not quiet still, like someone had pressed pause on 300 lives simultaneously. Sidonie's smile stayed fixed. Dad, This isn't the appropriate forum for, and while you're at it, I continued my words surgical and precise, cross-reference that amount, with your grandmother Eleanor's genuine unfalsified estate trust signature, the one she actually signed. The silence deepened, became physical. I could feel 300 people processing what they had just heard unfalsified, genuine. The implication clear as broken glass. Behind me, someone whispered, "Did he just accuse his own daughter of fraud?" The ballroom chandelier crystals refracted 300 phone camera flashes into 1,000 points of light. Everyone was recording, everyone would remember, and there was no version of tomorrow where I could take back what I'd just said. Sidoni's hand tightened on the podium microphone. The foundation's capital structure was established through proper legal channels with full estate documentation. If you have concerns about probate procedures, those should be addressed through appropriate legal venues, not. "I have the original trust documents," I said. "Eleanor's actual signature, witnessed, notarized, and certified by the probate court. I'd be happy to compare them with whatever documents you filed to claim $42 million belongs to a foundation Eleanor never authorized." The ballroom erupted, not with noise, with movement. 300 guests leaning forward, pulling out phones, whispering urgently to their neighbors. The mayor's table conferring. The foundation board members looking at each other with growing alarm. Kingsley Wainwright stood from his seat beside the stage, his face carefully neutral, but his body language screaming damage control. And on the screens showing Bryce's livestream count, I watched the number jump 15,000, 22,000, 31,000. Regional media had picked up the feed. Sidoni's reaction was broadcasting across Ohio in real time. Sidoni's smile held for exactly 2 seconds before her eyes found mine in the audience. The microphone in her hand started to tremble. Her carefully constructed performance, the humanitarian, the visionary, the devoted granddaughter honoring Eleanor's legacy, cracked down the middle like ice under pressure. Behind me, someone whispered, "Did he just accuse his own daughter of fraud?" The viewer count hit 38,000. And Sidney stood at the podium, 300 witnesses watching, trying to decide whether to deny, deflect, or double down on a lie that had just been exposed in front of everyone who mattered in Columbus, Ohio. Kingsley Wainwright, 62 years old, with silver hair and a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck, raised his phone in one deliberate motion. The screen's glow caught the ballroom's chandeliers as he stepped toward Glenn Underwood. Kingsley's voice carried across 300 witnesses, without amplification, the controlled precision of a man who'd spent 40 years commanding boardrooms and now had nothing left to lose. "Agent Underwood, I have 23 emails spanning March through November of this year that I believe are relevant to your investigation." Glenn moved forward, his federal credentials still visible on his jacket pocket. "Mr. Wainwright, I'll need to examine those before they can be entered into evidence." "Of course." Kingsley handed over the phone with the steady confidence of someone who'd already reviewed every pixel with his own attorneys. "The first one is dated March 17th. Sidoni offered me $500,000 to support her version of events regarding the Eleanor Beckett Healthcare Trust." The ballroom's collective intake of breath sounded like wind through a canyon. Sidoni's voice cracked across the space between us. "That's a lie, Kingsley, you can't." The second email, dated May 9th, increased the offer to $1.2 million. Kingsley's eyes stayed fixed on Glenn, never once looking at my daughter. By October 23rd, she'd reached $2.8 million. Each message included progressively more detailed instructions about what testimony I should provide if questioned by federal authorities. Watching Kingsley betray my daughter should have felt like victory, but instead, I felt like I was watching a building collapse. The structure I'd spent 67 years believing was solid, revealing itself as nothing but facade and rot. This was the man who'd walked Sidney down the aisle 10 days ago, the man who'd called himself her true father. Glenn scrolled through the phone's screen, his expression unchanged, but his fingers moving faster with each swipe. "Mr. Wainwright, when did you first contact the FBI regarding these communications?" "November 6th, 2 weeks ago." Kingsley finally looked at Sidney, and something ancient and cold moved behind his eyes. "After she threatened to destroy my reputation if I didn't comply. I've spent 40 years building my name in this city. I won't watch it burn because someone mistakes my affection for weakness." Lorraine's hand found mine in the crowd. Her grip was steady, grounding, real. Bryce's voice cut through the chaos, still filming, still documenting everything. "Mr. Wainwright, Are you saying you've been cooperating with federal investigators for 2 weeks while maintaining your public relationship with Sidney Wainwright was stoned despastabaste? At the FBI's request, yes. Kingsley straightened his tie with one precise motion. Agent Underwood asked me to proceed with tonight's event as planned to ensure all parties were present when evidence was revealed. Sidoni swayed on her heels, those $1,000 shoes that had clicked across the convention center's marble like judgments. Her hand clutched at her chest, fingers splaying against the designer dress. I can't breathe. Someone call. Knox Archer appeared at her elbow, his expression showing the same calculation I'd seen at the cafe 3 days ago. She needs medical attention. We need to get her out of here. Victoria Rothman materialized on Sidney's other side, her attorney's mask firmly in place. My client is experiencing a medical emergency. Unless you're formally detaining her, Agent Underwood, we're leaving. Glenn's smile was thin and knowing. Ms. Rothman, I have federal agents stationed at every exit of this building. If Ms. Beckett Wainwright requires medical attention, we'll be happy to provide it. But no one leaves this ballroom until I've finished documenting witness statements. The scent of Sidney's perfume, Chanel, number 5. The same Eleanor had worn drifted across the space between us. How many times had that scent meant safety, family, home? How many times had I been wrong? Sidoni's breathing accelerated, her chest heaving with theatrical precision. My heart, something's wrong with my heart. Knox, get the car. Victoria, tell them they can't. Agent Underwood. Victoria's voice carried the sharp edge of desperation, masked as authority. If my client suffers a cardiac event while you're blocking medical care, your client can receive medical evaluation right here. Glenn gestured to 2 figures in the crowd wearing EMT uniforms. We've had paramedics on standby since 7 o'clock. They can assess Ms. Beckett Wainwright's condition and determine if emergency transport is necessary. I watched recognition slam into my daughter's face, the hollow understanding that every exit had been sealed, every escape route mapped and blocked. The Medical Distress Act crumbled like wet paper. Knox stepped back from Sidney's side, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. I wanted on record that I was acting as an employee following instructions. Whatever Ms. Beckett Wainwright did, I wasn't aware. Mr. Archer. Glenn's voice could have frozen mercury. I'd suggest you stop talking and contact your own attorney. The one standing next to you represents Ms. Beckett Wainwright's interests, not yours. Victoria's face went white. She took one careful step away from Sidney, her designer heels clicking against marble. Agent Underwood, I should clarify that my representation of Ms. Beckett Wainwright was based on information I believed to be accurate. If I'd known about any fraudulent activities, Ms. Rothman. Glenn's tone suggested he was done with performances. You delivered a trespass warning to Harlan Beckett on November 11th using forged trust documentation. We have the original documents you submitted to Columbus Police Department. You'll want to contact your malpractice carrier. Sidoni stood alone now, abandoned by the attorney and assistant who'd enabled her for months. The ballroom lights caught the diamonds at her throat. Eleanor's diamonds, the ones that should have been sold to fund the hospice wing bearing my wife's name. Bryce's livestream counter showed 42,000 viewers. Glenn Underwood pulled a document from his jacket, formal and federal, and I saw Sidney's face go from panic to something worse, the hollow recognition that the trap had finally completely closed. Glenn hadn't opened that document yet. Kingsley Wainwright moved, first handing his phone to Glenn, with the deliberate ceremony of a man presenting evidence he knew would detonate everything. Glenn Underwood projected Kingsley's phone contents onto the ballroom screens, and the first email appeared in 30-point font. Subject family discretion, $8 million wire transfer proposed, sent from Sidney's personal account on November 13th, 2023. 300 witnesses went silent in the same heartbeat. Kingsley's voice carried across the ballroom without amplification, cold and precise. November 14th, my stepdaughter wrote, "Please confirm you won't interfere with trust restructuring. $8 million transferred to your Cayman account within 48 hours of document filing." The screen cycled to the next email, then the next. Each one time-stamped, authenticated damning. Sidoni's voice cracked across the space. He's manipulating timestamps. That's not my email address. Ms. Beckett, the metadata is authenticated. Glenn's tone could have frozen mercury. This came from your Harvard alumni email server. Bryce's livestream counter hit 48,000 viewers. I stood 20 feet from my daughter and watched Kingsley Wainwright, the man who'd walked her down the aisle 10 days ago, systematically destroy her with emails she'd sent from her own devices. The irony tasted like rust and old grief. The screens showed a third email, dated November 16th. Sidonie's words glowed against the convention center's cream-colored walls. Case situation becoming urgent. Wire must clear before father initiates legal challenge. Confirm Cayman routing number and timeline. She planned to steal $42 million from her mother's trust. Kingsley said each word measured and fatal. Pay me $8 million as hush money. Keep $34 million for herself. The math hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, the kind you smell for weeks afterward, the kind that marks every surface it touches. 40 years ago, I'd taught Sidonie to ride a bicycle on Mason Street, running behind her, with my hand on the seat until she found her balance. And now, I watch Kingsley Wainwright dismantle her life with the same patient precision, one email at a time, while she screamed denials nobody believed. Those emails are fabricated. Sidonie's voice climbed toward hysteria. Kingsley, you signed the foundation bylaws. You're in this as deep as anyone. I signed nothing. Kingsley turned toward the cameras, toward Bryce's live stream, toward the permanent record being carved into digital stone. Every document bearing my signature in connection with the Eleanor Beckett Healthcare Trust restructuring is a forgery. I have provided the FBI with authenticated samples of my actual signature, along with testimony from 3 handwriting experts confirming the forgeries. Glenn nodded once. Mr. Wainwright's statement is accurate. We have 14 forged documents, all created between August and November 2023. The ballroom's air conditioning couldn't keep pace with 300 bodies breathing the same shocked oxygen. Lorraine's hand found mine again, steady real grounding. Movement near the VIP section caught my attention. Knox Archer Sidonie's fiancé and a 31-year-old orthopedic surgeon from Cleveland had sat silent in the VIP section for the past hour. But now he stood with the careful posture of a man who decided saving himself mattered more than saving his relationship. He walked toward Bryce Gallagher with something small and silver in his hand, a USB drive. Knox's voice shook when he spoke, but the microphones caught every syllable anyway. Everything's encrypted with timestamps. She told me if I didn't back her version, she'd destroy my medical practice with malpractice allegations. The cameras swiveled. The live stream count jumped to 53,000. I have 37 emails where she details the forgery timeline. Knox's hands shook when he passed the USB drive to Bryce. I could see the tremor from 20 feet away, could smell his fear. Sweat mixing with expensive cologne, could hear the sharp intake of breath from the journalists who realized they were witnessing not just fraud exposure, but complete family disintegration. She ordered me to keep Harlan isolated from family events starting in August 2023. Sidonie's face drained of color. Knox, you signed the foundation bylaws. You're in this as deep as anyone. I signed what you told me were legitimate charitable documents. Knox's voice gained strength from desperation. You said your father had dementia. You said he was dangerous. You said, Agent Underwood. Bryce held up the USB drive. Mr. Archer says this contains recordings. Do you want to authenticate this before? We play it, Glenn said. Let's hear what Ms. Beckett really thinks about family loyalty. Bryce plugged the drive into his laptop. The ballroom screens flickered, then filled with an audio waveform. Static crackled through the convention center's speaker system. Then Sidonie's voice recorded in September 2023, clear and contemptuous. My father is too broken and stupid to ever figure this out. He'll die thinking Eleanor forgot him. The words landed like physical blows. Every syllable a betrayal, every consonant a knife. I'd known she'd forged the documents. Known she'd stolen the money, known she'd destroyed my reputation and tried to have me arrested as a trespasser at my own daughter's wedding. But hearing her voice, my daughter's voice, the same voice that used to call me Daddy and beg for bedtime stories, described me as broken and stupid to her fiancé while plotting to steal her mother's legacy. That was different. That cut through bone. The recording continued, Knox's voice quieter. What if he hires an attorney? Sidonie, laughing. Actually laughing. With what money I've got, Victoria ready to freeze any accounts he tries to access. He can't even afford a public defender's filing fee. The audio stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the convention center's steel beams. Glenn Underwood pulled formal paperwork from his jacket, Federal detention orders, probably, or arrest warrants with official seals and legal weight. He moved toward Sidney with the inexorable patience of consequences that had been $42 million in the making. Sidoni's eyes locked onto mine across the ballroom, not the defiant glare from the podium 15 minutes ago, but something raw and animal that I'd only seen once before, the night Eleanor died, and Sidney realized her mother was actually gone. She mouthed two words I couldn't hear over the media chaos. "Help me." I didn't move when Sidney mouthed, "Help me," didn't stand, didn't speak, didn't cross the ballroom to rescue my daughter one last time, and the moment she realized I wasn't coming, something fundamental in her face cracked open like river ice in March. Glenn Underwood moved forward with federal paperwork in one hand, his other resting near the handcuffs on his belt. Two more agents flanked him, boxing Sidney toward the exit corridor. She backed away from Glenn, her $1,000 heels clicking against marble with the frantic rhythm of trapped prey. "You can't arrest me in front of these people. I have rights. I have attorneys." "Your attorney just left the building, Ms. Beckett." Glenn's voice carried the flat certainty of a man who'd done this 100 times before. Ms. Rothman cited a conflict of interest approximately 7 minutes ago. Bryce's livestream counter showed 58,000 viewers. Sidoni's back hit the corridor wall. 300 witnesses watched in silence, the same society crowd who'd applauded her humanitarian speech 40 minutes ago, now forming a semicircle around her destruction. "This is because of him." Sidney's voice climbed toward hysteria, one shaking finger pointing at me across 30 feet of convention center floor. "You think I'm going to prison for protecting money that should have been mine? Eleanor was my grandmother, not yours, not some mechanic's charity case." The words echoed off cream-colored walls and crystal chandeliers, permanent and recorded. Glenn stopped advancing. His expression suggested he understood exactly what was happening. Suspects often talked themselves into longer sentences when cornered, and he was content to let federal evidence accumulate in real time. "I forged her signature in September." Sidney's voice cracked on every syllable. "I paid the attorneys, I bought the PR firm. I erased your name from every family event because I was ashamed. Do you understand ashamed of the grease under your fingernails and the way you talked at the country club? And I don't weft, yeah, I can see." Lorraine's grip on my hand tightened. I could feel her pulse through her palm, steady grounding real. Sidoni pushed away from the wall, her designer dress wrinkled from 40 minutes of federal exposure. "Do you know what it was like bringing you to Harvard alumni events, watching you shake hands with venture capitalists and private equity managers while you smelled like transmission fluid? Listening to my friends ask what my father did for a living and having to say automotive repair like it was something respectable. Every word was a confession. Every sentence another count of wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy. I started planning this in June." Sidney laughed wild and broken. "June 2023, 3 months before Eleanor died, before she even entered hospice. I'd already contacted the attorneys about trust restructuring options. Because I knew she'd leave that money to community outreach programs if someone didn't intervene. Watching your child confess to federal crimes is like watching a building demolition in reverse. Every scream added another floor of damage. Every admission poured concrete around the truth until the structure was so heavy with evidence it could never be undone." The ballroom had gone completely silent, except for Sidoni's voice and the soft whir of Bryce's camera equipment. She was dying. Sidney's voice dropped to something raw and vicious. Lung cancer stage 4, 6 months to live, and she spent her final days talking about legacy programs and community healthcare access, and making sure working families could afford medical treatment. "Do you know how much $42 million could have done for ME, for my foundation, my reputation, my future?" Glenn pulled the handcuffs from his belt with careful deliberation. "I deserved that money," Sidoni screamed. "I deserved a father who didn't smell like transmission fluid, and I deserved a grandmother who understood that family legacy means taking care of family. Not strangers, not working-class charity cases, not—" "Ms. Beckett." Glenn's voice cut through her breakdown like a blade through water. "Sidoni Prescott Beckett, you're under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud against the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust." Sidoni's eyes found mine, one last time. The woman who'd walked down the aisle 10 days ago in a $40,000 wedding dress now stood cornered and confessed her carefully constructed elite identity disintegrating under federal custody. "You have the right to remain silent." Glenn continued moving behind her with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd arrested hundreds of white-collar criminals. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Sidoni's Chanel perfumed the $400 bottle she'd special ordered from Paris, mixed with the salt copper smell of her panicked sweat, and I wondered if this was the last time I'd ever stand close enough to my daughter to smell anything at all. "You have the right to an attorney," Glenn said. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." The second agent stepped forward with documentation, arrest warrant, federal charges, Miranda acknowledgement forms. Sidoni's voice came out as a whisper. All the rage burned away to ash and desperation. "I was accepted to Princeton, full academic scholarship, pre-law program, everything paid. But Eleanor went to Harvard, and I thought if I followed her path, wore her clothes, used her maiden name Prescott in my professional life." She stopped. The handcuffs clicked closed, with a sharp metallic sound that cut through 300 witnesses' collective held breath. "I thought she'd love me enough to choose me over your pathetic working-class morality." Sidney's final words barely carried across the corridor. "Daddy." The handcuffs clicked closed, and Sidney whispered, "Daddy," one last time, but I'd already turned toward the exit. Lorraine's hand found my elbow and steadied me, and I didn't look back to see federal agents lead my only child away. By the time Lorraine walked me through the backstage corridor, Glenn already had 3 sets of handcuffs ready and pre-signed federal warrants for Sidney Kingsley, and Knox turned out the arrest paperwork had been prepared 72 hours ago, just waiting for enough rope. The corridor smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and old coffee. Somewhere behind us, I could hear Bryce still narrating for his live stream 60,000 viewers watching federal agents execute what Glenn called standard operating procedure for white-collar financial crime. Kingsley Wainwright stood near the loading dock exit, still wearing that expensive charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly in place, even as Glenn's partner approached with documentation and steel bracelets. "Kingsley Wainwright, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and obstruction of federal investigation." The agent's voice carried the bored efficiency of a man reading from a script he'd memorized years ago. "You have the right to remain silent." Kingsley's eyes went cold and calculating. "My attorneys will have preliminary motions filed by 8 a.m. tomorrow. This is harassment." "Your attorneys can file whatever they want, Mr. Wainwright." Glenn stepped forward with a second warrant. "Knox Archer, you're under arrest as accessory after the fact and conspiracy to commit federal fraud." Knox's face went white. "I cooperated. I gave you everything you said. Immunity. I said we'd consider cooperation during sentencing recommendations." Glenn's tone suggested he'd had this conversation before. "I never used the word immunity. That's a prosecutorial decision, not mine." The handcuffs clicked closed on Knox's wrists with the same sharp metallic sound they'd made on Sidney's 5 minutes earlier. Lorraine's hand stayed steady on my elbow, guiding me past the arrests like she was steering me through traffic. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else's body. "Agent Underwood." A younger federal agent approached with a clipboard. "Magistrate Judge Morrison's signature is from November 17th. You want me to note that, for the record, summed?" Glenn nodded. "November 17th, 2023. All 3 arrest warrants were signed 3 days before tonight's operation. Federal authorities had sufficient evidence to execute arrests prior to the humanitarian gala." The words landed like stones in still water. They'd known everything. Known enough to arrest all 3 conspirators before I'd ever stood up at that wedding reception and asked my daughter about the trust. "Why wait?" The question came out rougher than I'd intended. "If you had warrants signed 3 days ago, why let tonight happen at all?" Glenn looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, or might have been the professional distance of a man who'd arrested 100 desperate people. "Because suspects talk more when they think they're winning. Your daughter confessed to federal crimes on a live stream with 58,000 witnesses. That confession is worth 6 months of depositions. Justice is supposed to feel like completion, like the final bolt torqued into place on a rebuilt engine. But standing in that parking lot, watching federal taillights disappear, all I felt was the empty bay where something irreplaceable used to be. The media circus dissipated like smoke. Federal vehicles carried the three conspirators toward processing centers and holding cells. Camera crews packed equipment into vans marked with Columbus television station logos. Lorraine and I stood in the convention center parking lot, while November cold settled around us like a judgment. Eleanor would be proud of what you did tonight. Lorraine's voice carried the careful gentleness of someone who knew words couldn't fix anything, but offered them anyway. You protected her legacy and saved that community center from fraudulent control. I sent my daughter to federal prison. My hands looked strange under the sodium parking lot lights, the same hands that had taught Sidonie to throw a baseball, that had walked her through changing her first tire, that had held her when Eleanor died. There's no version of proud that survives that. There's a version of necessary that does. Lorraine pulled her coat tighter against the cold. Sidonie made choices. You didn't make them for her. The parking lot lights turned everything corpse yellow. Lorraine's concerned face, my grease-stained hands still smelling of the garage I'd left 6 hours ago. The white envelope with Eleanor's handwriting that I couldn't make myself open because some truths arrived too late to change anything. What's that? Lorraine's eyes tracked to my jacket pocket. I pulled out the envelope, thick paper, expensive stationery, Eleanor's careful cursive spelling my name across the front. I don't remember putting this in my pocket. I did. Lorraine's expression shifted to something sad and knowing. Eleanor gave it to me 3 days before she died, November 3rd. She said you'd know when to read it. Maybe tonight's not that night. My fingers traced the envelope's edge. Eleanor's handwriting unchanged by cancer or painkillers, or the knowledge that she was dying. The date in the corner. November 3rd, 2023, 1 week before lung cancer took her. Below my name in smaller letters, another line I hadn't noticed in the yellow light. For Harlan Open, only after you understand what Sidonie truly is. The words hit like a physical blow. Eleanor had known. Known or suspected something was wrong with our daughter, with the granddaughter she'd raised after I'd been pushed to the margins. She knew. The realization tasted like rust and old grief. Eleanor knew what Sidonie was before she died. Lorraine nodded slowly. My sister knew a lot of things she never said out loud. She hoped being wrong more than she feared being right. The parking lot had emptied completely now, just Lorraine and me and the distant sound of traffic on Interstate 71. The convention center's exterior lights shut off in sections automated timers, deciding the event was over. Somewhere in federal custody, my daughter was being photographed and fingerprinted and processed into a system designed to hold people who'd chosen greed over family. Somewhere in Columbus, Eleanor's trust sat secure and properly documented, ready to fund community health care programs and hospice wings and all the working-class families Sidonie had called charity cases. Victory, protection, justice, all the words that were supposed to mean something. I turned the sealed envelope over in my hands. Eleanor's careful cursive spelling, my name dated 1 week before cancer took her, and realized she'd known something was coming. The question wasn't whether to read it. The question was whether I could survive what it said. I didn't open Eleanor's letter that night. I put it in my jacket pocket, drove home to the empty house on Mason Street, and set it on the kitchen table where it sat untouched while I tried to sleep and failed. 24 hours after Sidonie's arrest, I was back under a 2004 Silverado, replacing a timing belt, when Glenn called to tell me the federal freeze had executed flawlessly, and 12 different elite institutions were racing to scrub Sidonie's name from their donor walls. Every institution she pitched has issued public statements condemning fraud and pledging cooperation. Glenn's voice carried satisfaction through the phone's speaker. The university already removed her name from their development council. I torqued another bolt into place, the socket wrench clicking with familiar precision. They didn't condemn it when they thought the money was real. They condemned it when cameras showed up. You're not wrong. Glenn's laugh was short and knowing. But the freeze worked $42 million secured untouched, waiting for probate to determine rightful executor. The Silverado's engine bay smelled like old oil and honest work. Outside my garage, Columbus was having a collective conversation about class and privilege and working families. But inside these walls, everything remained exactly what it had always been. Broken things waiting to be fixed. There's something else you should know. Glenn's tone shifted. Within 6 hours of the arrests, 3 people from Sidonie's social circle contacted my office attempting to negotiate sealed evidence suppression. Cash offers ranging from $50,000 to $200,000. My hand slipped on the wrench. They tried to bribe federal investigators. Attempted obstruction of justice, technically. We're deciding whether to file charges. Glenn paused. Your daughter's friends are exactly as corrupt as she is. They just haven't been caught yet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sidney had spent 20 years climbing into circles of elite wealth and discovered they were all willing to commit crimes to protect their reputations. She'd found her people. She'd just picked the wrong target. 2 weeks later, Franklin County Probate Court smelled like old wood and legal documents. Judge Marianne Caldwell, a 62-year-old Franklin County Probate Court judge with 30 years on the bench, reviewed the forensic signature analysis with the careful precision of someone who'd seen every variety of family betrayal. The forensic evidence is conclusive. Judge Caldwell's voice carried the weight of binding authority. Every signature on documents dated post-November 2023 is demonstrably forged. Mr. Beckett's executor status remains uncompromised per Eleanor Prescott Beckett's original trust directives filed in 2019. Glenn sat beside me in the gallery present as federal witness rather than investigator. Across the aisle, empty chairs marked where Sidney's legal team should have been. She'd fired them all after her arraignment, convinced she could defend herself better than attorneys who actually understood federal sentencing guidelines. Your Honor, the trust assets total $42.3 million currently under federal preservation. The estate attorney, a thin man named Marcus Holbrook, who'd been handling Eleanor's paperwork since 2015, gestured to documentation 3 inches thick. What are Mr. Beckett's intentions regarding distribution? Standing in probate court, listening to Judge Caldwell recite Eleanor's genuine intentions felt like watching a resurrection. My wife's actual voice restored after months of Sidney's ventriloquism, speaking truth about community service and working dignity that my daughter had tried to bury under forged signatures. Eleanor wanted to help people who work with their hands. My voice came out steadier than I'd expected. I'm going to make sure that happens. Judge Caldwell nodded once. The court recognizes Harlan Beckett as sole legitimate executor of the Eleanor Prescott Beckett Memorial Trust, with full authority to restructure, rename, and redirect assets according to decedent's documented wishes. Federal preservation orders will remain in effect until criminal proceedings conclude, at which point full asset control transfers to Mr. Beckett. The gavel came down with a sound like finality. December 12th arrived with freezing rain and the kind of gray Ohio sky that made working indoors feel like a gift. Lorraine sat across from me in the garage office reviewing foundation paperwork with the careful attention Eleanor would have given it. You could legally take executor fees. Lorraine's finger traced a line in the legal documents. 20% would be $8 million you've earned it after what she put you through. Eleanor married a mechanic who worked 60-hour weeks and never took a penny he didn't earn. I signed my name on the first page, then the second. I'm not starting now. The foundation structure was simple tool grants for apprentice tradespeople, vocational training scholarships for working families, legal aid for blue-collar workers targeted by corporate exploitation. Every dollar Eleanor had saved over 50 years of prudent investment would go directly to people Sidney had called pathetic and stupid. Naming the foundation took me 40 minutes and 3 false starts because I kept writing memorial and crossing it out. Eleanor wasn't a memorial, she was an active force even dead, and this money would do exactly what she'd wanted, rebuild engines and people who'd been stripped for parts. Eleanor Prescott Beckett Foundation for Working Families. I wrote the name carefully on the final incorporation document. How's that sound? Lorraine's eyes went wet. My sister would have loved it. The certified mail envelope arrived as I was signing the last page. Return address showed Franklin County Jail prisoner, correspondence inmate number, matching the booking photo I'd seen on the news 3 weeks ago. It's from Franklin County Jail. Lorraine read the envelope carefully. Prisoner correspondence, return address shows, Sidney's inmate number. My hands kept moving, finishing the signature dating the document December 12th, 2023. Outside the garage, freezing rain turned to sleet against the windows. I opened the envelope with the same socket wrench I'd been using to fix the Silverado 3 weeks ago, practical efficient refusing ceremony. Inside were 2 items, a handwritten letter on prison stationery and an official visitor request form. The form was dated December 10th, requesting visitation. December 18th, 2023, 6 days away. Sidney had filled out my name in careful cursive under approved visitor, as if I'd already agreed to come, as if seeing her face behind plexiglass was something I'd automatically choose. I set Sidney's visitor request form on the workbench next to Eleanor's still unopened letter, and the irony wasn't lost on me. One woman wanted to speak from the grave, the other from a jail cell, and I'd been avoiding both conversations for 3 weeks. December 18th was 6 days away. December 18th came and went. I didn't visit the jail, didn't respond to the visitor request, just rebuilt a carburetor while my daughter sat in a cell 8 miles away. And when her second letter arrived on the 20th, the handwriting looked smaller, like she was physically shrinking into the consequences. The sunset through my garage windows turned everything amber and shadow. I opened the envelope with the same deliberate care I'd use on a delicate engine part. Not reverence, just the muscle memory of precision. Cheap commissary paper, blue ballpoint pen, Sidney's handwriting without the confident loops she'd perfected at Harvard. This dad. The letter started, and I couldn't remember the last time she'd called me that, instead of using my name like a business associate. I told myself you embarrassed me, but the truth is I embarrassed myself by needing you to be something you never pretended to be. You were honest. I was the fraud long before I forged anything. My hand steadied against the workbench. Outside, December cold settled over Columbus like judgment. The day I erased your name from Grand's memorial program was the day I erased my own future. I see that now. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to know I finally understand what I destroyed. The letter continued for 2 pages. No manipulation, no legal strategy, just the raw acknowledgement of someone who'd finally run out of exits and found herself face to face with what she'd actually done. Knox won't return my calls. Kingsley's attorneys are blaming everything on me. I have no one, and I earned that. But you deserve better than the daughter I chose to become. I set the letter down carefully. Knox Archer had filed for annulment within 48 hours of her arrest. Glenn had mentioned it in passing last week, and Kingsley Wainwright's legal team was actively cooperating with prosecutors to ensure maximum sentencing, trading his testimony for reduced charges. The people Sidoni had climbed toward for 20 years had abandoned her the moment convenience disappeared. She'd found her elite social circle. They'd just never actually been there. 3 weeks I'd carried Eleanor's letter like a live grenade in my pocket, afraid of what she'd known and when she'd known it. But sitting under the fluorescent garage lights with Sidoni's apology in one hand, I finally understood that Eleanor wasn't reaching from the grave to wound me, she was reaching to set me free. I pulled Eleanor's envelope from the workbench drawer, where I'd been keeping it since December 12th. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with 3 weeks of avoidance and whatever truth waited inside. November the 3rd, 2023, 1 week before cancer took her, Eleanor's careful cursive spelling my name. I opened it. Harlan. Her letter began, and I could hear her voice in every word. If you're reading this, Sidoni did something unforgivable with the trust. I found discrepancies in September's financial documents that didn't match my instructions paperwork I never signed. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew. My vision blurred. Eleanor had known, had suspected for months before she died. I've been documenting her behavior for 2 years. Little things at first, the way she'd flinch when you mentioned your work, how she'd steer conversations away from your repair shop at family dinners. That time she introduced you as my mother's husband instead of my father at her fundraiser. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped loving her enough would fix whatever was broken. The letter continued in Eleanor's precise hand, each sentence a gift she'd left, knowing I'd need it exactly when I needed it most. But Harlan, if you're reading this now, it means I was right. It means she chose greed over family image over integrity. And here's what I need you to understand. You cannot fix people who choose rust over metal. You taught me that about engines 30 years ago, and it's just as true about human character. Eleanor's final paragraphs laid out everything how she'd quietly prepared documentation, knowing confrontation would come after her death, how she'd asked Lorraine to hold this letter until I understood what Sidoni truly was, how she'd been preparing me for the choice I'd eventually have to make. Protect what we built, but don't let destroying her destroy you. Choose to live. The truest inheritance I can leave you is permission to choose joy over justice life, over revenge. Build engines. Help people. Let her go. The last line was underlined twice. The foundation will do what I wanted. Let that be enough. I sat in the garage workshop for 20 minutes, Eleanor's letter in one hand, and Sidoni's apology in the other. Two women, two messages, two different invitations to move forward. Finally, I pulled out a sheet of plain paper and wrote 4 sentences in my own careful hand. Sidoni. A-worn engine can be rebuilt with new iron, but when human intent turns to pure rust, there is no metal left to save. You made your choices. I'm making mine. Live your life. Let me live mine. The foundation will do the work Eleanor wanted. That's the only inheritance that matters now. I signed it with just my first name. Not Dad, not Father. Just the man I'd always been, before she decided mechanics weren't respectable enough for Harvard alumni circles. The envelope to Sidoni sealed with a sound like finality itself, that adhesive strip click that means a thing is done and cannot be undone. And when I dropped it in the blue mailbox outside the post office on 21st Street, my hand felt lighter than it had in months. I drove back to the garage with Eleanor's letter on the passenger seat, her last sentence underlined twice in her careful hand. The truest inheritance I can leave you is permission to choose joy over justice, life over revenge. Build engines, help people, let her go. December 21st, 2023, and I finally understood what forgiveness actually meant. Not reconciliation, but release. I carried Eleanor's permission like a map for the week that followed, not to some destination I'd been avoiding, but back to the place I'd always belonged. The sign painter finished Eleanor's automotive in careful gold leaf on December 28th, and by noon, the first truck pulled in Big Eddie Morales with the '98 Kenworth same man who'd brought me transmissions for 15 years, saying, "Heard you were back under your own name, or close enough." Big Eddie Morales, a 52-year-old long-haul trucker who'd been bringing his Kenworth to me for transmission work since 2008, pulled into the newly renamed garage first thing December 28th, like he'd been waiting for the sign to go up. Eleanor would have liked seeing her name up there doing honest work. Eddie gestured to the fresh gold lettering with one calloused hand. Better than whatever your daughter was planning with all that charity bullshit. I torqued the mounting bolts on his transmission housing while he leaned against the bay door, drinking coffee from a thermos older than most marriages. Outside December, sun turned Columbus into something clean and cold. "And shop's busier than before all this started," I said. "Turns out exposing fraud on livestream is pretty good advertising." Eddie laughed. "Hell, half the guys at the truck stop said you're the only honest mechanic left in Franklin County. That's worth more than whatever money she tried to steal." Lorraine arrived around 2 with foundation paperwork and news that made Eleanor's entire legacy click into place like a perfectly aligned timing belt. 17 foundation applications this week. She spread the files across my workbench with careful attention. Welders, electricians, carpenters, all people Eleanor would have helped herself if she'd had the chance. She does have the chance. I wiped grease from my hands onto a shop rag that had seen 30 years of similar conversations. That's the whole point. The money doing what it was supposed to do all along. Lorraine pulled one application from the stack, a young woman named Jessica Brennan, 19 years old. Single mother of twins family, lost their home to predatory lending 6 months ago. She wanted to learn HVAC repair because the community college offered night classes and her grandmother could watch the babies. "This one starts Monday." Lorraine's voice carried Eleanor's same practical determination. Tool grant tuition coverage childcare stipend. Everything Sidoni would have dismissed as unworthy of elite attention. I looked at Jessica Brennan's application photo. Tired eyes, determined jaw hands that looked like they'd already done hard work. Eleanor would have loved her immediately. "Approve it," I said. "Approve all 17 if they're qualified. That's what the money's for." New Year's Eve arrived with the kind of crystalline cold that makes Ohio feel like a test of character. Lorraine's German village kitchen smelled like roast chicken, and the kind of wine Eleanor used to buy for special occasions. Nothing fancy, just honest and good. 3 place settings at the table, 2 chairs occupied, 1 conspicuously empty. To Eleanor. Lorraine raised her glass with steady hands. She married an honest man, and trusted he'd stay honest even when it cost him everything. The wine tasted like memory and consequence. Outside her kitchen window, Columbus prepared for midnight with the kind of careful optimism that January 1st always demands. "You think we made the right choice?" The question had been sitting in my chest for 6 weeks. Letting Sidoni go to prison when we could have, I don't know. tried something else. Lorraine set her glass down with the careful precision of someone who'd thought about this question every day since November 20th. We made the only choice that honored Eleanor's life. Her eyes went to the empty third chair. Some things are broken beyond mending, Harlan, but we can stand straight and live right. What does victory actually look like when you've won the war but lost your family? It looks like 17 apprenticeship applications and an empty chair at New Year's dinner, and the knowledge that you'll die having done the right thing to the wrong person. I haven't spoken to Sidoni since her arrest, Lorraine admitted quietly. My own great niece, Eleanor's granddaughter, and I don't plan to start. Does that make me a bad person? Makes you an honest one. I refilled both our glasses. Eleanor left us permission to let her go. I'm starting to think that was the real inheritance. We finished dinner before 10. Lorraine hugged me at the door with the kind of gratitude that doesn't need words, and I drove back to the garage through streets getting ready to pretend a calendar change could fix what broken people had done to each other all year. The 2006 Ford F25, Osatin Bay 3 with a routine exhaust repair I could do in my sleep. I grabbed my creeper rolled under the chassis and let the familiar darkness wrap around me like a benediction. 11:30 p.m. Outside Columbus counted down to midnight with the kind of manufactured celebration that never quite lands right. Inside Eleanor's automotive, one mechanic lay beneath honest work with a socket wrench and the understanding that some things don't need celebration, they just need doing. The chassis above me smelled like 30 years of oil changes and road salt and honest work smells Sidoni had called pathetic in her confession. And lying there in the dark with grease on my hands and fireworks popping outside, I'd never felt richer in my entire life. 11:58. I checked Eleanor's watch one last time, still frozen at 11:47 p.m., the exact moment she stopped breathing 14 months ago. I'd been carrying it in my pocket since November 10th, meaning to get it fixed, but lying there in the dark, I realized it was never meant to be repaired. Some things mark endings, some things keep ticking forward, and knowing the difference is what lets a man sleep at night. Midnight arrived with distant fireworks and closer silence. The wrench clicked one final time, torque perfect. Sidoni would start her trial in February. The foundation would help its first 50 families by March. I'd be here under engines doing what I'd always done. Some things stay broken, some things get rebuilt, and some things like a 67-year-old mechanic choosing dignity over wealth, truth over family. Eleanor's memory over his daughter's freedom turn out to be exactly what they were always supposed to be. The wrench clicked one final time, torque perfect, and I slid out from under the Ford into 2024 with Eleanor's frozen watch in my pocket and her living foundation in the world. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. Choosing the right path doesn't always feel like victory. Looking back, I wish I'd seen the signs earlier, the way Sidoni flinched when I mentioned my work, the distance growing like rust on good metal. I spent 20 years believing love could fix what pride had broken. As a dad, you want to believe family loyalty trumps everything. Don't make my mistake. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. This wasn't just a story about a dad seeking family revenge against a daughter who chose greed over integrity. It became a lesson about choosing dignity when pride demands reconciliation. Every father knows that family can hurt you deeper than strangers ever could, but that doesn't mean you surrender your values for connection. I believe God put me through this for a reason to show that revenge isn't about destruction. It's about refusing to enable what's wrong. Eleanor's letter taught me the hardest truth: some battles aren't meant to be won. They're meant to teach us when to walk away. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a choice between family loyalty and doing what's right? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if stories like this one matter to you, please subscribe to Dad's Calm Revenge. There are more stories here about finding strength when everything falls apart. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. One final note. While this story is inspired by real human experiences, certain details have been adjusted for storytelling. What matters is the truth it carries, and I hope it stays with you.